307. After knowing that his master had passed away, the young novice monk cried very sadly. He did not seem like a monk at all. But when Chen Pinggan saw the little bald head wailing and shaking the old monk's arm with all his might, as if he wanted to shake his master awake from his sleep, Chen Pinggan felt that it was only human nature to do so. After knowing that his master had passed away and burned the sariya that was mentioned in the Buddhist scriptures, the young novice monk laughed again. He felt that his master's Buddhist teachings were probably quite powerful. The young novice monk still did not seem like a monk. Chen Pinggan had been helping the temple to take care of the old monk's funeral. He was busy and privately told the new abbot of Xinxiong Temple about the old monk's thoughts. The matter of the sariya should not be announced to the public in a hurry. Otherwise, it would attract criticism from the common people and might even lead to speculation from the government. The new abbot did not have any objections. He lowered his head and put his palms together to express his gratitude to Chen Pinggan. After that, Chen Pinggan did not go to Xinxiong Temple to meditate. However, he told the new abbot that if the temple had any difficulties, he could inform him at his residence. He, Chen Pinggan, would help as much as he could. The middle-aged monk chanted the name of Buddha. After Chen Pinggan left, he went to the shrine in the main hall. He silently lit an everlasting lamp for this kind-hearted benefactor. He called the young novice monk over and asked him to look after the lamp often. The little novice monk uttered an "oh" and nodded his head in agreement. Seeing that the little fellow agreed so quickly, the monk knew that he would slack off. He bent his finger and lightly tapped the little bald head, lecturing him, "Muyu, you must remember this matter." The little novice monk uttered another "oh" with a bitter face. It was hard to say whether he would remember the matter or not, but in short, he already knew the consequences of not having a good memory. After his senior abbot left the main hall, the young novice monk sighed. His senior brother used to be so kind. After becoming the abbot, he became as heartless as his master. Even if he could become the abbot in the future, he did not want to. Otherwise, he would definitely hurt his junior brother's heart. Hey! He was the youngest disciple of his master. How could he have a junior brother? He would never have one in the future. It was too much of a loss. At the thought of this, the young novice monk turned around and ran out of the main hall. He chased after the abbot and eagerly asked when his senior brother was going to accept disciples. The head monk knew what the young novice monk was thinking and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pretended that he was going to use the young novice monk's head as a wooden fish again. His Dharma name was Wooden Fish. The young novice monk sighed and ran away. Chen Pinggan, whose state of mind was more peaceful, found it strange that he still did not pick up the mountain-shaking fist manual and the swordsmanship manual. Instead, he continued to wander around the capital. This time, he carried a small bag wrapped in cotton and walked slowly. He drank wine and ate dry biscuits. He did not have a fixed residence, so he could just find a quiet place to settle down. It could be under the shade of a tree, on a roof, or by a small bridge over a flowing stream. The tall vermilion walls, the greenery peeking out from the high walls, the swinging sound of the swings and laughter within the walls. There were laurel-educated scholars who wrote poems and poems in a flourishing age. At that time, there was a man in white sitting quietly on a tree branch and drinking wine. There was a restaurant near the water that was filled with distinguished guests. They were all young talents in the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom. They gave pointers on the state and current affairs. It was natural for scholars to govern the country. Chen Pinggan sat on the roof of the restaurant and carefully listened to their discussions. They were full of hot blood and hated evil. However, Chen Pinggan felt that it was a little difficult to implement their policies. However, it could also be that these young talents were drunk and did not speak in detail. Two groups of ruffians had agreed to fight, each with 30 to 40 people. Perhaps this was their Jianghu. They were roaming the Jianghu and making a name for themselves. Chen Pinggan squatted on a dilapidated low wall in the distance. He found that the Jianghu veterans who were over 20 years old were slick with their moves. The youths who were under 20 were fearless and ruthless. After the fight, their faces were bruised and swollen with blood. They put their arms around their brothers' shoulders and began to look forward to the next Jianghu feud. The leader of one of the groups was a little older, almost 30 years old. He shouted for them to go to the tavern to drink, and they went to the tavern in a grandiose manner. The beautiful woman who was selling wine was his wife. Seeing this group of familiar faces, she could only squeeze out a smile and take out wine and food to entertain her man's brothers. Looking at the man who was surrounded by people and talking loudly in the middle, the woman's brows showed some sorrow for not having a good life, but there was also some admiration in her eyes. She looked at her man. Her man's most capable and daring subordinate, a tall youth, was secretly looking at her. Chen Pinggan sat at the furthest place from them. He ordered 2 pots of wine. He poured 1 pot into the blade-nourishing gourd and drank the other pot immediately. The young woman gritted her teeth and raised the price of 2 pots of wine by 30 copper coins. Fortunately, the man didn't seem to know the market price and didn't hesitate to pay. The woman felt a little guilty, so she gave him 2 more dishes that she made to accompany the wine. The man stood up and thanked her with a smile. The woman blushed and quickly turned around. She did not dare to look at the handsome and clean face again. On the other side of the crowded table, a man who was nearing his 30s said that one day, his brothers would have a real territory in the capital. At that time, everyone would drink wine and eat meat. When they saw the officials with swords at their waists, they would not have to be afraid. At that time, they would definitely beg to be brothers with them. In the future, they would ask that scholar Ma, who looked down on them, for a few spring festival couplets and a few Fu characters. Let's see if he would still dare to look at them from the corner of his eyes, or if he would have the guts to say no. The man was tongue-tied and the people around him were excited. They cheered loudly and spat everywhere. Especially the hot-blooded youths. After drinking and spitting, they returned to the table. In their drunken eyes, they could vaguely see that they were all brothers. They only felt that life was so happy. Chen Pinggan silently left the wine shop on the street. After walking far away, he could not help but look back. It was as if he saw himself, Liu Xianyang, and the slug Jiyu Kan. The 3 of them were also sitting there. At that time, the Dragon Kill apprentice, who was as dark as charcoal, would be distressed about the cost of the wine. Liu Xianyang must have started to worry after his heroic words and complained about why GQ did not like him. Jiyu Kan, who was very precocious since childhood, would probably gnash his teeth and learn from the people of Jianghu. He emphasized that if he wanted to take revenge, he should do it quickly and not care about anything else. Chen Pinggan looked away and continued to walk. A sharp-eyed youth joked, "Just now, that pretty boy stopped and looked at us for a long time. Could it be that he has taken a fancy to our sister-in-law?" The drunk man slammed the table and said, "If he has the guts, I will hack him to death. Believe it or not, even if I die tomorrow, your sister-in-law will be a widow for the rest of her life and will not marry anyone. She will not marry even the emperor. A delicate pretty boy is nothing. So what if he has a sword on his back?" As he spoke, his head hit the table heavily and he was completely drunk. The young woman lowered her head and wiped the table. She secretly pursed her lips and smiled for some reason. The tall youth who often glanced at the woman's graceful figure also lowered his head at this time. He was a little flustered and also a little resentful. The youth drank a mouthful of wine. It was tasteless. For some reason, a haggard woman caught a naughty child and spanked him. The child's mouth was dry and howling, but in fact, he was winking at his friends not far away. The woman in shabby clothes hit him and then cried out. The child was stunned and then really cried. After a torrential downpour, the capital finally saw the warm sun again. A group of extravagantly dressed children rode their horses through the streets, raising their whips as they spurred their horses, splashing mud everywhere. There was an old woman's stall by the side of the road. She didn't have time to evacuate in time, so some of the crudely made knitted items were accidentally splashed by the mud. Her face immediately turned deathly pale. The last rider was a young woman with arrogant eyebrows. When she saw this scene, she didn't stop, but casually threw a money bag on top of the stall. However, because she wasn't familiar with horsemanship, she was too eager to throw the heavy money bag accurately. In a moment of carelessness, she tilted and fell off the horse. After a good round of rolling, she cried out in pain. Her originally elegant face and expensive clothes were no longer worth looking at. The woman staggered towards the horse that had stopped. With some difficulty, She climbed onto the horse's back and raised her whip to leave. Covered in mud, she raised her head high. From the corner of her eyes, she saw a swordsman wearing a snow-white robe standing on the side of the street looking at her. She could not help but turn her head. That person raised his arm at her and gave her a thumbs up. The woman rolled her eyes and did not take it to heart. Chen Pinggan walked and stopped like this. He saw many scholars and the various attitudes of the common people. The ugliness of White River Temple lasted for less than 10 days before the curtains were drawn. The imperial court had already closed the coffin. There were not many monks left in White River Temple. Apart from the main culprits, who were immediately executed, imprisoned, and expelled, the property of White River Temple was confiscated. As for who would accept this hot potato, some said that it was an eminent monk from one of the other 3 great temples in the capital, while others said that it was the abbot of a few famous temples in the region. Obviously, there were masters in the Nanyuan kingdom who were advising the emperor. The scandal of the White River Temple was cut in half at the waist and quickly stopped. This was because the attention of the imperial court had quickly shifted to another grand event. One of the 4 great grandmasters in the world, the leader of the Lake Mountain sect, Yu Zhani, had successfully broken through after 10 years of seclusion. He held a Wulin assembly and gathered all the heroes to discuss the matter of encircling and annihilating the 3 sects of the devil cult. At that time, the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan kingdom, Zhong Qiu, Tong Qingqing of the Mirror Heart sect, and Lu Fang, the mountain master of the Bird's Eye Peak, who was known to be able to nurture sword intent in the mountain mist and sea of clouds, would all appear. The 4 great grandmasters gathered at Mount Yunyu, which was adjacent to the capital of the Nanyuan kingdom. This was a grand scene that had not been seen in Jianghu for 100 years. These 4 people were all the leaders of the martial arts world in their respective countries. They could set off stormy waves in Jianghu with a stomp of their feet. Especially between the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan kingdom, Zhong Qiu, and Yu Zhani of the Songsui kingdom, whose enmity had been entangled for 60 years. The 2 of them were born in the marketplace of the Songsui kingdom and had been neighbors since childhood. They were a pair of life-and-death brothers. By chance, they began to roam Jianghu together and each had their own adventures. They became the most eye-catching pair of martial arts geniuses in Jianghu at that time. In the end, for some unknown reason, they turned against each other and became enemies. After a life-and-death battle that was watched by only 4 or 5 people, both of them were seriously injured. Zhong Qiu then came to the Nanyuan kingdom. At dusk, Chen Pinggan returned to the house near the Zhuoyuan alley. Before that, there was still a group of people playing chess at the corner of the street. The grandfather and grandson were watching others play chess. Seeing Chen Pinggan's figure, the child's face turned pale. He hurriedly got up and asked Chen Pinggan to watch the game. Chen Pinggan approached and watched for a while. Then the child said that he had something to do and went home first and ran away. Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment. He was not interested in watching the game. After standing for half an hour, he slowly walked back to the house. After opening the door and entering the house, the child stepped on a small stool in the opposite house and looked at Chen Pinggan through the window. The child gently breathed a sigh of relief. Chen Pinggan closed the door, took off the bundle and put it on the bed. Xiaolian immediately jumped out from the ground, babbling and pointing, as if she was very angry. Chen Pinggan glanced at the stack of books on the table. There were some subtle wrinkles that were not easy to notice. Compared to when he left the house, there were obviously more wrinkles. He squatted down and opened his palm to let the little thing walk into his palm. Then, he got up and sat by the table. Xiaolian jumped onto the table. The little thing, who did not attract dust, gently jumped onto the mountain of books. She knelt on the title page of a sage's book and carefully smoothed the wrinkles with her little arms. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's okay. Books are for people to read. Didn't they already return it? Don't be angry." The little thing, who was working hard over there, turned her head and blinked her eyes. She was somewhat puzzled. Chen Pinggan rubbed her little head, took out a bamboo slip and a carving knife, and gently placed them on the table. In the night, Chen Pinggan quietly went to White River Temple. He had burned incense here before, so Chen Pinggan was not unfamiliar with it. White River Temple had a large hall that was extremely strange. There were 3 Buddha statues enshrined. One had an angry look, one had a lowered eyebrow, and there was also a Buddha statue in the middle that was actually sitting upside down. For thousands of years, no matter how much incense was burned, the Buddha statue always had its back facing the door and the pilgrims. Recently, White River Temple had been somewhat desolate. During the day, it was completely deserted, and at night, it was even more desolate. In addition to the frightening rumors that had been spreading, the usually solemn Bodhisattva and Heavenly King statues had become sinister and sinister. A few days ago, a group of thieves came to take advantage of the temple. In the end, they all ran out while howling in grief. They were all crazy and only calmed down when they were sent to prison. They only said that White River Temple was haunted and that they must not go there. Before Chen Pinggan entered the side hall where the door was not closed, he deliberately lit a Yang-Chi lantern lighting talisman. There was nothing strange about it. Inside the temple, he quietly changed his position a few times. The talisman was always slowly burning at a uniform speed. Chen Pinggan was just about to leave White River Temple. Just as he walked near the entrance of the hall, he suddenly leaped backwards. The tip of his foot touched the ground, and in the next moment, he was sitting on the beam of the hall. He lay down on his side and held his breath in concentration. 3 people swaggered in from outside the hall. They did not look like thieves at all. Instead, they looked like high officials and nobles enjoying the scenery under the moonlight. Chen Pinggan frowned. He had actually seen 2 of them before. They were martial arts peers from a quiet house in Zhuiyuan Alley. The old man was tall and had a thin appearance. Although he was not a Taoist, he wore a simple silver lotus crown on his head. Compared to Chen Pinggan's gaze on the street from afar, the old man did not deliberately conceal his aura tonight. When he crossed the threshold, it was like a towering mountain, forcefully crashing into the main hall of White River Temple. The woman took off the veil hat that covered her face. Her appearance was moving. She took off the cloak that covered her body. The color was magnificent. The most extraordinary thing was that she wore a pair of wooden clogs. Her feet were as bare as snow. The handsome young man had an unfamiliar face. He was tall and slender. He wore a navy blue robe with large sleeves. A string of coral prayer beads was wrapped around his hand. As he walked, he gently twisted the beads. The woman's voice was clear. It was not the capital accent of the Nanyuan kingdom. She glanced at the young man charmingly and teased, "My flower hairpin boy, since you are a devout Buddhist, why don't you kneel down and kowtow? When the time comes, I will stand in front of the Buddha statue and take advantage of young Master Ju. Won't I become famous overnight? I will have no regrets even if I die." The young man smiled but did not speak. He only raised his head to look at the 3 statues. The world was silent. In such a large hall, only the soft sound of the beads rolling could be heard. The old man smiled and said, Don't joke about Jusha. He has a good temper and won't lower himself to your level. Otherwise, if we shed all pretense of cordiality and fought, who will pay for Jusha's coffin?" Who looked like a young girl but had the temperament of a woman, covered her mouth and laughed. She was so charming that the hall, which was originally gloomy and frightening, seemed to be overflowing with spring. The young man named Jusha, nicknamed Flower Hairpin Boy, smiled helplessly. "Old sect Master Ding, please don't bully a junior like me. Yu Zheni of the Lake Mountain sect, Zhong Qiu of the Nanyuan Kingdom, Tong Qingqing of the Mirror Heart Pavilion, and Lu Fang of the Bird's Eye Peak are all amazing immortals. Among them, Tong Qingqing is of the same generation as Master Grandfather. On the other hand, we are weak. Do we really want to play this game of pulling chestnuts out of the fire? Even if we get the golden-bodied Arhat and the scripture, can we leave the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom alive?" The woman counted with her fingers and pointed out the names one by one, talking about the most secretive matters in Jianghu. Although Master Grandfather is the real number 1 in the world, 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. Yu Zheni has so many disciples and disciples. Zhong Qiu of the Nanyuan Kingdom is a local bully. Tong Qingqing, that old witch, likes to bewitch people. Last time when Flower Hairpin Boy came back injured, he said that he was beaten half to death by her, but in fact, He was fascinated by the old witch's beauty and was playing the trick of injuring himself to gain our confidence. Especially that Lu Fang. The number of times he fought in the past few decades can be counted on one hand. Everyone in Jianghu says that he is a righteous master grandfather. From this, we can see how talented he is. After so many years of practicing swordsmanship, maybe he has already surpassed Yu Jini and Zhong Qiu? The old man turned a deaf ear and kept silent. He put his hands behind his back and looked at the Buddha statue with its back to the world. The woman stomped her foot with some resentment. The wooden clogs stepped on the stone floor, making a crisp sound. Zhu Shi comforted the woman. These four people are not as united as a rock. When it comes to life and death, I'm afraid none of them will be willing to sacrifice themselves. The woman laughed. Are there any of us who are willing? Zhu Shi looked calm and continued. In fact, just my father, Arm Saint Cheng Yuanshan, and Sharpener Liu Zong, in terms of top fighting power, are not inferior to the four great grandmasters. This time we are working in secret, not two armies on the battlefield. We don't have to pay attention to the number of troops. You don't have to worry. In fact, the four great grandmasters were just the words of the righteous people in Jianghu. They purposely excluded the people of the devil cult and the underworld. They were just happy behind closed doors. What really convinced the public was the 10 great masters. It just so happened that the righteous and evil were equally divided. Of course, the four great grandmasters each occupied a place. The first person of the righteous path who changed from martial arts to immortal cultivation, Yu Zhani. He was ranked second. The first person of external martial arts, Zhong Qiu. He was ranked sixth. Rumor had it that Tong Qingqing, who was 90 years old but still looked youthful, was said to be the most beautiful woman after her. Even if all of her looks and charm were added together, they still couldn't compare to her. He was ranked ninth. The swordsman Lu Fang, who lived in seclusion at Bird's Eye Peak, was the youngest of the four great grandmasters. He was not even 50 years old. He was ranked 10th. But as time passed, almost everyone believed that Lu Fang, who was ranked last 20 years ago, was the most qualified person to challenge and defeat the first person. Some people even believed that Lu Fang had surpassed the imperial tutor of Nanyuan Kingdom, Zhong Qiu, and was ranked in the top 5. And the Arm Saint Cheng Yuanshan mentioned by hairpin boy Zhu Shi was extremely skilled in martial arts. When facing people and enemies, it was a matter of life and death. Therefore, he was not recognized by the righteous sects. They felt that his martial arts were too lacking and did not deserve the title of Great Grandmaster. This person was ranked 8th. The blade grinder Liu Zong was a true top evil master. He loved to kill people and was notorious. He was ranked 7th. As for Zhu Shi's father, Zhu Fei, he was a devil that countless people of the righteous path dreamed of chopping into pieces. He was extremely skilled in martial arts, but his conduct was extremely bad. He created the Spring Tide Palace and collected beauties from all over the world. Except for a few sons, there were hundreds of people in the Spring Tide Palace. There was not a single man. Therefore, Zhu Fei called himself the Emperor of the Mountain, Immortal of the Land. But what made people helpless was Zhu Fei. He was ranked 4th and was recognized as the world's best in martial arts. When Lu Fang was young, he used his sword dragon circling the beam and successfully pierced Zhu Fei's body 3 times. Zhu Fei was still safe and sound. The loss of combat power was almost negligible. Lu Fang then took the initiative to retreat. Lu Fangju, who had barged into the Spring Tide Palace alone with a sword, had paid a huge price for his impulsiveness. During the 3 years he had been away traveling, Zhu Fei had personally tortured the 600 people of his sect to death. Rumor had it that Lu Fangzhou's master's wife and a dozen or so senior and junior sisters were still serving as maids in the Spring Tide Palace. As for why Lu Ju didn't challenge Zhu Fei again after hearing the bad news after returning from his trip, it became one of the biggest Jianghu secrets in the world. Together with how powerful the number 1 man in the world was, how beautiful Dong Qingqing of the Jingxin Pavilion was, and how old Yu Zheni could live, they were known as the 4 great mysteries of the world. From the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom to the Yunyu Mountain outside the city, there were treacherous clouds everywhere. There was a middle-aged man who came from afar. After entering the capital of the Nanyuan kingdom with the smell of alcohol, he was like a fish in water. He drank all day in a wine shop on the street and became muddle-headed. In the end, he had no choice but to leave his sword at the wine shop. 5 taels of silver, and that was when the shopkeeper's wife saw that he was muscular and could steal a few times while he was asleep. Otherwise, it would be 3 taels of silver at most. On the top of the Yunyu mountain, there was a person with a childlike figure and an innocent face. Every day, he had nothing to do, so he carefully polished a jade bamboo folding fan. When the generals of the Nanyuan kingdom who were in charge of the 800 imperial guards at the foot of the mountain saw this person, they had to respectfully address him as Elder Yu. In the crown prince's residence, there was a stooped old man who had been the head chef for many years. He opened the lid of a large jar of pickled vegetables that had not yet arrived. The sour smell assailed his nostrils as he muttered, "Troubled times, troubled times." However, there was no doubt that the 3 people who entered the White River Temple tonight without burning incense were the most important. This had little to do with the woman and the hairpin boy, Zhu Shu, because the old man's surname was Ding. For 80 years, he had maintained his position as the most powerful person in the world. He killed people based on his personal preferences and moods. He killed famous Jianghu figures, emperors, generals, ministers, countless evil people of the Wulin world, and the elderly, women, and children on the roadside. Later, he passed the position of cult leader to his only disciple who was killed by him and disappeared. However, after he left Jianghu for 20 years, he was still the most powerful person without any suspense. There was a laughable Jianghu rumor that the Reverence Tower, which specialized in collecting Jianghu secrets and evaluating the level of grandmasters, had had 2 tower masters. Their best friends had once asked them out of curiosity why they did not remove the devil Ding, whose fate was unknown. Both of them had said the same thing: "If he is not dead, I will be dead." At this moment, in the main hall, the woman smiled and asked, "Your father only wants a beauty like Fairy Ju, but on the surface, you put in the most effort. Don't you feel that you are losing out by mobilizing so many people?" Zhu Shu smiled bitterly and said, "Don't you know my father's temperament? To put it nicely, he loves beauties but not the country. To put it bluntly, he forgets his life when he sees beauties. If Zhong Qiu did not live next to the imperial palace of Nanyuan Kingdom, he would have entered the palace to snatch Empress Fan." The woman rubbed her cheeks and said with self-blame, "Zhu Shuzhen and Fan Guan'er, one is the most beautiful woman today, the other is 20 years ago, the most beautiful woman in the world. Your father's taste is really high." No wonder it was difficult to enter his eyes. Even when they met and drank tea together, he was polite and looked straight ahead. Zhu Shu smiled bitterly. The woman smiled and asked, "Why doesn't your father have any thoughts about Dong Qingqing?" Zhu Shu looked up at the majestic Buddha statue that was glaring at the world. His fingers kept twirling the beads, and he said softly, "My father said that if a delicious food is hot to the mouth, it is worth it even if it burns the mouth. But if it is destined to burn the stomach, no matter how greedy you are, don't touch it." Hearing this, the old man who was standing with his hands behind his back twitched the corner of his mouth. He looked around and said softly, "Let's go. The golden body is no longer here." The beautiful woman and Zhu Shu had no objection and did not dare to have the slightest doubt. Although the woman kept calling him Master Grandpa and sounded very cute and intimate, in fact, she was frightened. She was afraid that if she was not careful, her head would be smashed by the old man. Zhu Shu was not much better. His father, Zhu Fei, was at most a dispensable protective talisman, far from enough to be a real life-saving talisman. The old man, whose every move seemed to be in harmony with heaven and earth, slightly paused when he stepped over the threshold. It was just such an inconspicuous small movement, but it made the woman and Zhu Shu's breath become chaotic, their chests stuffy, and sweat oozed out of their foreheads. They stopped and stood still. The old man slightly sped up, stepped over the threshold, and walked down the steps. The 2 young martial arts geniuses who had won a great reputation in Jianghu felt their qi and blood rushing like marionettes. They could not help but walk quickly with the old man. The old man looked up at the moonlight and said with a smile, "This capital of Nanyuan Kingdom is much more interesting than the one 60 years ago. The two people behind him looked at each other and felt that there was a deep meaning in his words. The night was as cold as water. Chen Pinggan changed from a lying position to a sitting position. First, he put his palms together and apologized to the 3 Buddha statues, asking them not to blame him for being disrespectful. The old man surnamed Ding was very powerful. Chen Pinggan suddenly lay back on his side. Soon, 2 figures flashed like wisps of green smoke. What a pair of golden boy and jade girl. The woman's appearance and bearing were even better than the woman in wooden clogs. The man was about 30 years old. He was handsome and elegant, wearing a quaint crown and a distinguished style. He had the noble air of an emperor. He said with a mellow capital accent, "Fairy fan, as you said before, this old devil Ding's temperament is really strange. Just now, he clearly saw us, but he didn't make a move." The ethereal woman was like an orchid that grew in the wilderness. Her appearance was so outstanding that it was unreasonable. Ordinary beauties would feel ashamed of their inferiority at first sight of her. Ordinary men would not even have the heart to possess her. They had to know their own limits. After hearing the man's words, she said, "This old hierarch disdains to make a move against us." The man said with a smile, "Can't I block one move? That's not necessary. My master is one of the few people who are the closest to those 10 people. Now that I'm fighting with my master, I have a 20 to 30% chance of winning." The woman shook her head and said, "Your Highness is naturally very talented, but there is a world of difference between a life and death battle between Jianghu grandmasters and a martial arts competition. Your Highness, don't underestimate this Jianghu. Even if you are facing a second-rate master, you can't take it lightly until the last moment." The man was sincerely happy that this fairy was worried about him. However, being born in an imperial family, he had long since developed the habit of not showing his emotions. He nodded lightly and said with a smile, "I'll remember. In the future, before I fight with others, I'll take out fairy's words and think carefully before making a move." The woman surnamed Fan smiled and did not say a word. She had already walked the Jianghu alone for 6 years. She did not care about the man's reserved and frivolous thoughts. Of course, she would not be moved. She suddenly sneered and said, "Come out." The man's expression changed slightly and his heart trembled. To be able to hide until now without being discovered, this person was at least as strong as the 2 of them. He and the woman looked around the hall. After a while, Fairy Fan let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "I've made a fool of myself in front of your Highness. In the Jianghu, it's better to be safe than sorry." The man felt relieved and could not help but smile. He turned slightly and imitated the Jianghu man, cupping his hands and saying, "Fairy's teachings, this one has learned." The woman also smiled. The 2 of them then searched around the 3 Buddha statues but did not find any hidden mechanisms. Their efforts were in vain, so they could only leave White River Temple like the previous 3. On one of the beams, ripples were rippling, gradually revealing a snow-white color. It turned out that the golden necklace robe had become much bigger, allowing Chen Pinggan to shrink into it. It could be considered an unorthodox camouflage that Chen Pinggan had figured out himself. It was quite useful against the people of Jianghu, but it did not have the air of an expert or the demeanor of an immortal. Chen Pinggan sat on the beam and was about to take off the blade-strengthening gourd and drink a mouthful of wine when he suddenly remembered that this was a temple hall. He retracted his hand and floated to the ground, about to leave White River Temple. Just as he arrived at the threshold of the hall, he saw the beautiful woman surnamed Fan coldly looking at him. Chen Pinggan stopped. The woman did not speak or attack. She just stared at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan was somewhat depressed. "Miss, what are you looking at? I already have a girl I like. She's prettier than you." In any case, that was what Chen Pinggan thought. However, Chen Pinggan grinned. Actually, the woman in front of him was quite pretty. "But, miss, being pretty is your business. It is not a reason for you to stare at me like an idiot, right?" Chen Pinggan was not willing to waste time with her. He was afraid that it would not be easy to escape by leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls. So, he simply used a mind talisman and left White River Temple. The woman's mouth was slightly agape, her face full of shock. Could it be that he was a reclusive Jianghu senior? Not long after Chen Pinggan left White River Temple, his gaze was attracted by a bustling street filled with colorful lights. The fragrance was rich, so he ran to a stall and ate a bowl of something that was numb, spicy, and scalding. In the end, Chen Pinggan found that there was a beautiful woman standing beside him. 308. It was still the woman surnamed Fan. At first glance, she was dressed simply and elegantly, but if one looked closely, they would find that her clothes were embroidered with the pattern of water clouds. Under the moonlight in the sky and the lights in the market, it was faintly discernible. It was dazzling, noble, and graceful. However, at this moment, she should be wearing a mask. She only had 50 to 60% of her previous appearance, so it was unlikely that she would cause a sensation in the market. She was still staring at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan put down his bowl and chopsticks and had to ask, "Do you have something to tell me?" She suddenly reached out and rubbed her forehead. She looked around and frowned. There was a diner at the next table arguing with someone else. He slammed the table and glared at the other person aggressively. He pointed at the other person's nose and scolded something like, "Your family is a brothel, little whore, and you don't do things more than 3 times. If you dare to talk nonsense again, I will directly open a brothel in your family." The two sides argued with a strong accent of the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom, which was unpleasant and messy. The woman gently rubbed her temple with one finger and returned to normal. Using the voice transmission of Jianghu martial artists, her eyes were full of curiosity and longing. She asked, "Young master, are you a banished immortal?" Chen Pinggan couldn't help laughing and shook his head. "I'm just a foreigner who came to Nanyuan Kingdom to travel. I'm not a banished immortal as you said." The woman was a little regretful and apologized, "Young master, please forgive me for disturbing you." Chen Pinggan waved his hand. "It doesn't matter." She hesitated for a moment and reminded him, "Recently, the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom is not very peaceful. Young master is a dragon among men and is easy to be targeted. I hope young master will be more careful." Chen Pinggan cupped his fists. "Thank you, Miss Fan." Fan Wanna was not a sloppy person. She left the bustling night market just like that. Some gangsters wanted to take the opportunity to take advantage of her, but every time they made a move, she just dodged, like a fish swimming among the water plants and stones. Chen Pinggan had some doubts. According to the bamboo house old man, whether a martial artist was talented or not depended on whether he could cultivate the most brilliant fist intent from the inferior boxing style. This was one of the reasons why he had chosen Chen Pinggan. However, Old Man Kui wanted to save face no matter what and was unwilling to admit that the mountain-quaking fist actually had many redeeming qualities. Chen Pinggan was simply unwilling to expose him. According to the conversation between Old Man Ding, Crow, and Zhu Shi, this strange woman in front of him, who he had never met before, was most likely the famous Fan Wn. In his hometown, the Aquarius continent, she was the Divine Grandeur sect's female crown, He Xiaoliong. Fan Wn clearly had the intention of approaching the Tao, but why was it that her martial arts cultivation seemed to have been pressed down by a 10,000-kilogram boulder, unable to advance for a long time? One's aura could be hidden, and one could return to one's natural state. But after a long time, one's inner spirit would not be able to deceive others. Every slow and rapid breath, every movement of a person's would often reveal the secrets of heaven. Old Man Ding, who wore a silver lotus crown, seemed to have casually stepped into the main hall of White River Temple, but Chen Pinggan immediately sensed a strange phenomenon. Chen Pinggan had come from Pearl Paradise, so he had seen many peak-level characters. For someone to make Chen Pinggan feel that they were quite strong, they were naturally not simple. The person who fed the fist in Luo Po Mountain's bamboo house was once a peak 10th-level martial artist. The person who fed the sword on Osmanthus Island was an old golden core. After Fan Wn's figure disappeared, Chen Pinggan thought for a while and also left this bustling city. The capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom was divided into 81 squares of various sizes. The general layout was similar to many of the vassal states that Chen Pinggan had passed through. This city was known as the most virtuous in the world. The north was noble, the south was poor, the east was martial, and the west was cultured. White River Temple was located in the western part of the city, and it was mostly the residences of middle-level civil officials and wealthy merchants. At this time, Chen Pinggan was walking on a stone arch bridge. In the dead of night, Chen Pinggan lightly jumped onto the railing and walked to the top of the blue stone bridge. Chen Pinggan looked down at the small river below him. As it flowed, there was a water-suppressing beast standing at the bottom. It was shaped like a flood dragon and was not rare. In many of the bustling cities of the Aquarius continent, there would be this type of water-suppressing beast that was used to suppress the monsters in the water. However, Chen Pinggan could not detect that this ancient water-suppressing beast had a trace of spiritual energy, as if it was just a decoration. While Chen Pinggan was staring at the river in a daze, Fan Wn, the fairy from the Mirror Heart Pavilion, met the crown prince, Wei Yang, who should have returned to the palace of the Nanyuan kingdom. Although this person was of noble descent, he was a young master who had hidden his strength. His teacher of martial arts was a grandmaster of the older generation who had been exiled to the Nanyuan kingdom from the north. As Wei Yang had said, he was one of the few people in the world who was closest to the top 10 masters. The teacher of the crown prince, Wei Yang, had an irreconcilable enmity with the Chuehua sect, one of the 3 sects of the demonic sect. Therefore, this respected crown prince was also recognized by the Lake Mountain sect and the Mirror Heart Pavilion as a righteous person. He also had the hope of becoming the next leader of the Jianghu. The Mirror Heart Pavilion even intended to support him as the next emperor of the Nanyuan kingdom. And that Ya from the demonic sect secretly supported Wei Yang's younger brother, Wei Chong. Both sides deceived each other and framed each other. They had been fighting for the favor of the old emperor of the Nanyuan kingdom for 5 or 6 years. Fan Wn and Wei Yang were scattered in the quiet night. Wei Yang whispered, "Fairy Fan, you don't have to hide from me if you want to see that person. He can hide in the main hall of the White River Temple without us noticing from the beginning to the end. He is definitely not an ordinary Jianghu man. If he is from the demonic sect and something happens to you, what will you do?" Fan Wan didn't want Wei Yang, the future emperor of the Nanyuan kingdom, to have a grudge. She smiled and said, "Your Highness, among you, Wn, the demonic sect's Qing Ya whose real name is unknown, the Spring Tide Palace's hairpin boy Ju Shi, and the other 6 young masters around the same age, who do you think has the highest martial arts among the 10 of us?" Wei Yang already knew this in his heart. In addition to having a good master, he was also the crown prince of a kingdom. He had spies and informants all over the world. Even if he hadn't been to Jianghu, he had long been familiar with the secrets of Jianghu. Wei Yang didn't need to think and said, "It's hard to say who will be the champion, but the top 3 have long been determined. In a battle of life and death, once you meet on a narrow path, who lives and who dies will depend on who is better at fighting for the general trend of the unseen world." Speaking of this, Wei Yang glanced behind the woman. Fan Wan didn't bring any weapons with her tonight. He smiled and said, "Fairy Fan is proficient in the Mirror Heart Pavilion, the Lake Mountain sect, and the long-lost White Ape backsword technique. The 3 sages' teachings are inclusive, so of course you can be ranked in the top 3. My master sincerely praised you, saying that with or without a sword behind your back, you are too Fan Wn. Fan Wn smiled and said, "Your Highness is too kind." Wei Yang put one hand behind his back and gently tapped the jade belt on his waist with one finger. The Devil Sect's Ya, when she first entered the capital, was proud and arrogant. She dared to run to the imperial tutor's side and even suffered a punch from the imperial tutor. She was injured and didn't die. Everyone thought she was lucky, but my father told me that the imperial tutor once said that the little girl was very talented in martial arts. She could be said to be the Lu Fang of women. The last person should be that Feng Qingbai of unknown origin. In the past 10 years or so, he appeared out of nowhere. No clues about his background or his sect could be found. He likes to travel around and constantly challenges masters from all walks of life. We only know that this person has made rapid progress. Looking at his selection of opponents, you will find that he has grown from a layman with a little knowledge of martial arts to a first-rate master in the world in just 10 years. After saying this, Wei Yang turned his head and asked, "Fairy Fan, among the remaining 7 people, is there anyone who hides even deeper? Fan Wn put her hands behind her back and walked on a quiet and deserted small bridge. She approached the railing and patted the head of the small stone lion carved on it time and time again. She shook her head and said, even if there is, at least I and the Mirror Heart Pavilion don't know. Wei Yang smiled warmly. He never thought that Fairy Fan could be so playful. For a moment, he looked at that pair of watery eyes and was a little dazed. A man's inferior vision only looked at a woman's face. A medium vision looked at a woman's figure. A superior vision looked at a woman's spirit. What's more, Fan Wn had all 3 and was the world's #1 romantic. How could she not make the arrogant crown prince of Nanyuan Kingdom, His Royal Highness, not be moved? A fair and virtuous woman was a good match for a gentleman. Wei Yang's admiration for her, whether it was words or sight, was not impudent. Although he was impudent, he never deliberately hid it so well that not even a drop of water could leak out. Wei Yang stopped and quickened his pace to walk side by side with her. He wanted to reach out and hold her slender hand, but unfortunately, he didn't have the courage. Fan Wn stopped and turned sideways. She raised her eyes and looked into the distance with a worried expression. She slowly said, the reason why we are talking about this is because I want to talk about a strange thing that I still don't understand. Wei Yang curiously said, tell me about it. Fan Wn rubbed her eyebrows. Wei Yang worriedly said, what's wrong? Did that white-robed swordsman use some sinister method? She smiled and shook her head. Your Highness, have you heard about the banished immortal from your master? Wei Yang smiled and said, my master is a boorish man in the Jianghu. Let's not talk about this. He dislikes literati and poets the most. He always said that they are a bunch of ball-less women. When I was young, I learned martial arts from my master. As long as I spoke a little bit in a literary manner, I would be beaten. So I can only appreciate the grace of the banished immortal from poems. Since Wei Yang didn't have any clues, Fan Wn didn't want to talk about it anymore. She changed the topic. Her eyes were deep and she murmured, Your Highness, have you ever felt that when we experience something, walk through a place, or meet a person, we always feel that something is familiar? Wei Yang nodded, yes, of course. The Crown Prince found it interesting and asked with a smile, does Fairy Fan also believe in the Buddhist reincarnation? Fan Wn shook her head. On the Zhenyo mountain outside the capital, there were 7 or 8 people standing tonight. Among them was the childlike Yu Zheni of the Lake Mountain sect. He looked solemn as he gazed at the silhouette of the capital in the night. The sloppy man who reeked of alcohol even pawned his sword to the wine shop woman. His name was Lu Fang. The imperial tutor of the Nanyuan Kingdom, Zhong Qiu, was a thin man who didn't smile much. He had an elegant temperament. It was hard to imagine that he was the world's #1. There was only one person left. Yu Zheni's voice was as tender and clear as his appearance. He said slowly, apart from old Demon Ding, Ju Fei of the Spring Tide Temple, Wanderer Feng Feng, and Tong Qingqing of the Mirror Heart Temple, we have to kill one more person. Lu Fang said self-mockingly, it can't be me, right? Zhong Qiu glanced at him coldly. Lu Fang spread his hands and said helplessly, can't I even joke? Apart from the 3 of the 4 grandmasters, there were also some people who shouldn't be here. But without exception, they were either one of the top 10 masters on the list or a grandmaster of martial arts like Wei Yang's master. Tonight on the Zhenyo mountain and in the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom, there would be no talk of good or evil. Yu Zheni stared at a certain place in the capital and said softly, Lu Fang, you and your friend first take care of the biggest accident. As for whether you kill him together or alone, I don't care. But you can only succeed, not fail. In 3 days, bring me the man's head. As usual, the killer gets all his belongings. Lu Fang touched the back of his head and sighed. In the distance, someone laughed sinisterly, eager to try. Chen Pinggan didn't return to the house. Like a lonely ghost, he toured the capital at night. During this time, he snuck into the library of a scholarly family and casually flipped through the books. Before dawn, he quietly left and listened to the lectures of the teachers at the Imperial College. It wasn't until noon when the sun was high in the sky that he returned to the Zhuoyuan alley. He deliberately avoided the house related to the old man surnamed Ding and the flower hairpin man Jusha. There were a few narrow bookstores in the Zhuoyuan alley. In addition to selling books, they also sold some of the 4 treasures of the study that couldn't be said to be on the desk. They were crude and simple. Fortunately, the prices were not high. After all, the buyers here were poor scholars who came to the capital to take the exam. Chen Pinggan bought a few scattered landscape travel books in a shop. He definitely wouldn't read them in the near future. He just wanted to let the Luopa mountain have more books. By the time Chen Pinggan returned to the alley of his residence, the delicate and pretty little fellow had just come back from class. The two walked together in the alley. The child seemed to have something that was hard to say. After holding it in for a long time, he didn't have the nerve to say it. Chen Pinggan pretended not to see and returned to the house. Dinner was at the same table as the child's family. According to the agreement when they rented the house, this family would add a pair of bowl and chopsticks for Chen Pinggan and receive an extra 30 copper coins a day. The old woman vowed that there would be fish in the meal. In reality, Chen Pinggan often went out. He either left early and returned late, missing the dinner time, or he simply disappeared for a period of time. The old woman was very happy. There wasn't much oil on the table today. The old woman smiled apologetically and said, "Why didn't young Master Chen tell us earlier today so that we could have prepared the ingredients?" Chen Pinggan smiled and said that it was fine as long as they could eat their fill. The old woman then asked what Minga said. When she heard that Chen Pinggan would go out tomorrow, the old woman sighed and complained that young Master Chen was too busy. It was so difficult to eat a simple meal. In fact, her daughter-in-law's cooking was not bad. She didn't dare to say it was good, but it was definitely good. The woman who had been eating with her head down and didn't even dare to eat more food raised her head slightly and smiled. It was unprecedented for her mother-in-law to praise her. After Chen Pinggan finished eating, he moved a small stool and went to the street corner where the child's grandfather often played chess with others. It was rare to see a large bluestone paved street. The people who had lived here for generations would watch people come and go. They would chat with their neighbors and relieve boredom. If they saw a rich family's son galloping by on horseback, or a famous brothel girl walking by, it would brighten up the entire street. Chen Pinggan sat not far from the chess stall, surrounded by a large group of people. Suddenly, he found that the child had also moved a stool and sat beside him. He had already taken off the sword chi and placed it in the house. It was unreasonable for him to carry a sword on his back. He brought the sword strengthening gourd with him, but left the more obedient flying sword 15 in the courtyard to prevent it from being stolen. Now that the capital of the Nanyuan kingdom was not peaceful, there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Presumably, they would soon rise. Sensing the child's awkwardness, Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "Something on your mind?" The child who went to school and knew some rough etiquette lowered his head. "I'm sorry, young Master Chen." Chen Pinggan asked softly, "What do you mean?" The child sat on the low stool, clenched his fists and put them on his knees. He didn't dare to look at Chen Pinggan. "My mother often went to look for young Master Chen's things when you weren't at home." Chen Pinggan was stunned for a moment. He had thought that it was the mean old woman who often went to his room to visit and rummage through his things. He had never thought that it was the mother of the seemingly honest child. The child's mood became heavier. "Later, when young Master Chen was away for a long time, my mother stole the books that young Master Chen put on the table and gave them to me. I couldn't help it and peeped. I know it's not good." Chen Pinggan wanted to play it down and say it's okay, but he quickly swallowed his words and changed his words. "It's not good." Previously, when he was wandering around the capital, he saw a wealthy and imposing mother at a noisy temple fair. Behind them was a group of retainers with bright eyes. The child was 5 or 6 years old. When he saw a beautiful older sister picking things from a stall, he ran over and pulled the young girl's sleeve. The child naturally didn't have any evil intentions. He just wanted to attract the adult's attention. The young girl ignored him at first, but the child came from a noble family. When he saw that the older sister ignored him, he became annoyed and the strength of his hands increased. The young girl was annoyed by the pestering, but she was educated and reasonable. She didn't argue with the child who didn't know any better. She raised her head and looked at the child's mother, who was standing not far away. The mother called the child back and stopped him from continuing his nonsense. At that time, if this scene stopped here, Chen Pinggan would have let it go. However, the woman with the noble temperament said something that Chen Pinggan couldn't let go of. He couldn't figure out the crux of the problem. It must be the words that the woman, who came from a wealthy family, taught her child. Look, even your older sister is angry. Don't be naughty anymore. At first glance, there was no problem. The woman's expression had always been graceful. The gaze she looked at her son was kind and doting. Her attitude toward the young girl was not bad at all. It wasn't until now that Chen Pinggan casually chatted with the child that he understood the reason. It was similar but different from the tragic disaster related to the burning of Senior Songyu in the Combe country. It was wrong for the woman to teach her child like this. Could it be that the child could act like this if the young girl at the store wasn't angry? Compared to the tragedy of Songyu burning his senior in the pugilistic world, it seemed that he could not talk too much about such a trivial matter in the marketplace. If he really talked about it endlessly, he would definitely be suspected of being unreasonable. Perhaps the woman would think that he was being unreasonable and pushing his luck. Did he really think that the family name was easy to bully? Even the young girl might not appreciate it. Chen Pinggan took out the bamboo scroll and looked at the left and right ends. His gaze kept moving to the middle. There were already many marks on it. Chen Pinggan's left and right index fingers pressed against the two ends of the bamboo slips, which were like rulers. He turned his head and smiled at the uneasy child. Your mother's actions are definitely wrong. It's still not right for you to admit your mistakes and not correct them. However, after knowing this, you have to understand that there are big and small things in this world. In life, other than right and wrong, there are also human relationships. For example, why did your mother do what she did? Wasn't it because she wanted you to study more and become a scholar, a high official, or even become a grand scholar? Your mother is such a person who can endure hardships. Could it be that she did it to bring glory to her ancestors? So that she could dress well and eat well? I don't think so. She just wanted you to live a good life in the future, right? If you understand why your mother did such a wrong thing, then you don't have to think too much about it. Her wrong and her good to you, you already know it in your heart. Next, it's your turn. You've read books and learned the sage principles in the books, so you know how to behave. Then, if time flowed backwards and you were given another chance, what would you do? The child had been listening attentively. Because Chen Pinggan's reasoning was simple and he was an intelligent child, he understood. After thinking carefully, he said, I should quietly put the books that my mother stole back in young Master Chen's room and then openly borrow the books from you. Is that right? Chen Pinggan nodded and said, I only dare to say that on my side, it's already right. If it was someone else, you might have to think more. The child jumped up and said, Young Master Chen, then you won't blame my mother, right? Chen Pinggan rubbed the child's head. Some mistakes can be made up for. You did that. The child nodded vigorously. That's why teacher told us that knowing one's mistakes is the most important thing. Chen Pinggan, who didn't say more than a few words when fighting to the death, actually said so much to a child today. Even he was surprised. However, his state of mind calmed down a bit. He felt that even if he immediately went to practice his stance walking and swordsmanship, there wouldn't be a problem. Chen Pinggan put the bamboo scroll back into his sleeve and simply said a few more words. You must eat every day in order to live. Under the premise that you don't have to worry about food and clothing, reading books and reasoning is not necessarily to become a sage, but to live a better life. Of course, it's not necessarily better, but the classical teachings of the scholarly sages and the priceless advice of generations of sages, at the very least, give us the most right possibility. It tells us that we can live like this, and live with a clear conscience. The child said in a daze, Young Master Chen, I don't really understand all this. Chen Pinggan smiled, there are many things that I haven't thought through thoroughly. It's like building a house with only a few pillars. It's still far from being able to shelter you from the wind and rain. So you don't have to take it seriously. It's fine if you don't understand. If you have any questions in the future, you can ask the teacher. The child smiled and stood up, carrying a small stool. After bowing to Chen Pinggan, he said that he wanted to go home and copy books. The teacher was very strict. If he slacked off, he would be punished. Chen Pinggan smiled and waved his hand. Go. Chen Pinggan didn't turn around and said, throw away the stone in your hand. A young voice sounded behind him. Oh. Then there was the sound of a stone falling to the ground. It seemed that the stone wasn't small. A skinny little girl clapped her hands, swaggered to Chen Pinggan's side and squatted down. She turned her head and asked, can you lend me the stool? Chen Pinggan turned a deaf ear to her. He took off the blade-strengthening gourd and started drinking. The little girl asked again, you're so rich. Can you give me some? Didn't you just say that I have to eat every day to not starve to death? Chen Pinggan didn't look at her and asked, how did you find me here? The conversation between the two of them was completely irrelevant. The little girl pitifully said, I know you don't lack money. You don't feel bad giving me a few taels of silver, but I can buy a lot of biscuits and meat buns. In winter, many old beggars freeze to death in the capital every year. If I want to take off their tattered clothes, it will take a lot of effort. Look, the clothes I'm wearing now, it's how I got them. If I had money, I would definitely be able to survive. Chen Pinggan still didn't look at her. The clothes you're wearing now must be good. But what about the clothes you wore last time? That little girl secretly took it out and gave it to you, right? Why didn't you wear it today just to see me? The little girl looked innocent and didn't understand Chen Pinggan's meaning at all. She smiled sweetly and said, in summer, it's cooler to wear tattered clothes. I usually can't bear to wear the clothes she gave me. In winter, I'll take it out and wear it. It's especially warm. Chen Pinggan suddenly stood up and looked left and right at the end of the street. His words were directed at the squatting little girl. Go and stand close to the wall. No matter what happens next, don't make a sound. The little girl was a quick-witted person. She secretly observed Chen Pinggan at all times. So, she glanced at Chen Pinggan's line of sight. Then, she muttered and complained. She got up and was about to run to the wall to take refuge. Suddenly, she heard that person say, bring the stool. She was unhappy. Why should I help you? Are you my long-lost wild father? Chen Pinggan straightforwardly said, 10 copper coins. Okay, father. The little girl's dark face immediately smiled like a flower. She picked up the stool and ran. 309. At the two ends of the long bluestone paved street, there were two people facing each other. Chen Pinggan and the chess stall were in the middle. On Chen Pinggan's left was a woman with a white veil over her face. She was dressed in bluestone, wrapped in red brocade and tied with a jade belt. She held a peeper in her arms. Her body was enchanting, swaying gracefully. On the right was a man who was 8 feet tall. He was bare-handed and his upper body was bare. His muscles were taut, but he wore a pair of pink trousers. This pair of man and woman did not look like common people who would be accompanied by the crowing of chickens and the barking of dogs. The man was murderous and didn't hide his fighting spirit at all. He stared at the guy holding the red wine jug. He was slightly taller than the average strong young man from the southern garden country. Although he had a delicate face, he couldn't be considered a young man. The man laughed loudly and said, "Foreigner, my name is Ma Xian. I come from beyond the Great Wall. A busybody gave me the nickname Pink Vaja. Yesterday, someone spent 1,000 taels of gold to buy your head. He also said that your martial arts are unfathomable. Although you look young, you are very likely to be an old monster like Yu Zheni. So I called my lover to come with me. Today, do you want to commit suicide and leave your body intact, or do you want to be smashed into pieces by my fists?" The man's voice was loud and his words were earth-shattering. The people at the chess stall were in an uproar. They did not care about the chess boxes and benches and fled in all directions. They were going to kill someone in the middle of the street. How would they dare to join in the fun? According to the old generation of Zhuoyuan Alley, in the history of the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom, there had been several fights between Jianghu experts. The fights had been earth-shattering, and several large squares had been reduced to ruins. After the fight, there were at least several hundred families who wore mourning clothes. Through the thin veil, the woman looked at the people who were fleeing. The corners of her mouth curled up. Her right hand was about to pick the string and cut off the head with music. But the woman suddenly stopped and smiled sweetly. Since this young master doesn't like to liven things up, I won't do anything unnecessary. It turned out that the white-robed foreigner had his eyes on her. She felt that if she dared to touch the strings, he would leave the pink diamond behind and target her first. She was here to help her old sweetheart earn 1,000 taels of gold, not to be the main force of a thankless fight. The reason why she was willing to accept this deal was that she and the pink diamond Ma Xian were rare partners in Jianghu. One of them would fight hand-to-hand while the other would distract and harass from afar. It was flawless. As long as it was a Jianghu grandmaster other than the 10 people, the two of them could cooperate. Even if they could not defeat the opponent, they could still escape. Chen Pinggan felt a little baffled. Why was he looking for him? First, it was that fairy fan WNR, the so-called banished immortal. Now, someone offered a price of 1,000 taels of gold. Therefore, in broad daylight, 2 people with bloody and murderous auras jumped out. If it wasn't for him stopping them, perhaps those fleeing commoners would have already died. Compared to the intimidating tall and sturdy man Ma Xian, Chen Pinggan's attention was more on the lady. The beautiful peeper made from a whole piece of red sandalwood fell into Chen Pinggan's eyes. There was a mystery to it. Near the strings of the peeper, there were strands of bloody aura and thick ink-like death aura, intertwined and flowed out in all directions. Just that the peeper did not produce any resentful spirits or malicious spirits. Chen Pinggan felt that it was strange. According to his experience in Aquarius continent and Tongyi continent, there were so many spirits that died under the peeper. The resentment would condense, and there should be some strange spirit that would appear, just like in Eagle Castle. The skinny little girl sat on the stool by the wall and muttered, "No one can see me, can't see me." As to why she did not follow the commoners and escape into the distant streets, it was not that she did not hesitate. But she felt that if she stayed here, she would be more at ease. Chen Pinggan asked, "If I offer 2,000 taels of gold, can you tell me who is the mastermind behind this?" The lady lowered her head and covered her mouth, smiling coquettishly. Because she was hugging the peeper, after doing this, her chest was squeezed. Ma Xian glanced at her, his eyes burning with passion, and scolded with a smile, "Slut, after not seeing each other for a few years, after seeing such a handsome man, you still can't walk. After this transaction, let's find a place to fight, can't it be cheaper? One time for 100 taels of gold, who in the world can afford it?" Chen Pinggan sighed, "Can't we talk?" The man strode forward and laughed, "Chop off your head, and we will talk again. What should and should not be said, I will tell you, how about it?" The lady hugging the peeper walked forward slowly, and when she was about 100 steps away from Chen Pinggan, she stopped. She gently shook her wrist, and was ready to strike. Ma Xian suddenly stomped on the ground, and the bluestone ground under his feet shattered. His burly figure instantly arrived less than 10 feet away from Chen Pinggan. His pink trousers clung to his thighs, and because he was too fast, there was a flapping sound. It was only 10 feet away, but the guy who seemed to be scared silly still did not move. Ma Xian sneered, "You dare to provoke my lover, you deserve to die." He no longer held back his strength, and his fist suddenly accelerated, smashing towards Chen Pinggan's head. Chen Pinggan's mind raced, and he did not delay in dodging the fist. His body floated backwards, and his feet were rooted to the ground. The pure martial artist here seemed to be a little bold. Facing the enemy, and he still had the mood to chat. Wasn't he afraid that when he used up his breath, the opponent would take advantage of the gap between the old and the new? His fist missed, and Ma Xian knew that it was not good, so he immediately dispersed his qi. Although he was a grandmaster of external martial arts, he was still careful, and he was still afraid that his body might not be able to withstand the attack. He had no choice but to give up attacking, and turn to defense. After the qi flowed through the acupoints of his body, his skin glowed, as if it was covered with a layer of golden paint. Chen Pinggan kicked upwards, and kicked Ma Xian's abdomen. Ma Xian's whole body was kicked up into the sky. With a twist, Chen Pinggan suddenly stood up straight, and his feet moved lightly, swaying left and right, and just happened to dodge the 4 strings that condensed into lines. The lady twisted, rolled, and plucked, and the 5 fingers of her right hand were dazzling. The peeper was silent, but a trace of sparkling light suddenly appeared in front of her, and in a flash, it disappeared. Chen Pinggan floated back and forth on the street. Every time, he would be able to dodge the cold threads that burst forth from the zither strings. Those threads that were like sharp blades crisscrossed in the air in a disorderly manner. They were like dozens of arrows that were shot out in rapid succession from a strong bow, enveloping all directions. Ma Xian used a 1,000-pound drop to the ground, and his hands formed the shape of a hammer, fiercely pressing down on the street. Obviously, the lady was also paying attention to Ma Xian's movements, and when Ma Xian landed, the threads that surged out from the peeper slowed down, so as not to delay Ma Xian's attack momentum. Chen Pinggan disappeared into thin air, and the burly man was stunned for a moment. It was too late to withdraw his fist, and he heavily smashed on the street. Ma Xian, with his long arms like an ape, bent his knees and smashed the ground in a half-squatting position. His fist touched the ground, and the bluestone slabs were constantly shattered and splashed. Chen Pinggan appeared beside Ma Xian, and pressed down on Ma Xian's shoulder with one hand. He slightly increased the force, and Ma Xian suddenly sank down, and his knees sank into the bluestone slabs. Ma Xian roared angrily, and wanted to push away the heavy hand, but the man pressed down again, and he sat on the ground. The layer of gold on his skin, which meant that his external skills had almost reached the peak of Jianghu, actually began to dissipate on its own. The qi in his body began to flow uncontrollably, and Ma Xian was so frightened that his liver and guts were about to burst, and his soul was about to scatter. After the exchange of pointers, Chen Pinggan finally discovered the truth. The pure qi in the body of this martial artist who walked the path of external martial arts was too scattered. The aura and fist intent that leaked out of his body were all real, and he was in the realm of qi refining. But it was like a house. If the wood of the pillars was not good enough, it would not have a problem in a normal sunny day, but once it encountered a real storm, it would not be able to support it, and it would collapse easily. In one breath, it was messy, and it sought more but not refinement. It was not pure at all, but more like a martial artist who walked the path of a qi trainer. The woman holding the peeper simply stopped the movement of her fingers, and there was a resentful sigh behind the veil. There was a big gap in strength between the two sides. This time, she and Ma Xian had hit an iron plate. The seemingly young white-robed man in front of them was very likely to be a hidden great guru who was infinitely close to the 10 people in the world. A member of the devil cult. Another god's favored son after old demon Ding appeared out of nowhere. To unify Jianghu. Or a direct disciple carefully trained by the old immortal Yu Zhani. Was it a trump card to deal with old demon Ding's reappearance in Jianghu? The situation was a mess. So was the woman with the peeper. She and Ma Xian should not have gotten involved. Someone on the wall gently clapped his hands. Amazing, amazing. No wonder he was temporarily put on the list. He is indeed worthy of our attention. The woman looked up and suddenly felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. A man with a stiff smile was squatting on the wall. His face had not changed for thousands of years, as if he was wearing a shoddy mask that would take root and sprout once it was put on, and could not be taken off in this lifetime. Smiling face, Chen Tang. Apart from the 10 people, this person was the most difficult guru to deal with in the world. He was also the most eccentric of the heterodox doctrines. He did not kill the innocent, but when he met masters of the same level, he would definitely pester them. Although the 8-armed god Shui Yuan, who was one of the 10 people in the older generation, had fallen out of the 10 people because of his age and the peak of his fist technique had passed, but a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. One of the 3 sects of the devil cult was almost killed by his 8-armed magical skill. However, when faced with smiling face, he was pestered by Chen Tang for a whole year and almost lost his mind. Squatting on the wall, smiling face grabbed a piece of soil with one hand and threw it lightly. He laughed and said, "If you deliberately hide your strength, you will die. Not at his hands, but at mine." "Right, Ma Xian. And that big-breasted woman over there." "Right, what's your name again?" Ma Xian, who had been pressed down by Chen Pinggan's palm on his shoulder several times, suddenly exploded with vigorous stellar energy. His aura was countless times stronger than before. The woman holding the peeper also put on a pair of fake fingernails that glowed with a dim light. She no longer had the slightest suspicion of showing off her skills as she began to pluck the strings of the peeper. Ma Xian fiercely threw a backhand punch. Chen Pinggan stretched out a palm in front of him to block the punch. Borrowing the momentum, his body slid backwards, his feet lightly sliding across the surface of a mirror like two chess pieces. Between Ma Xian and Chen Pinggan, two green threads as thick as thumbs crisscrossed, causing two cracks to appear on the wall on both sides. If Chen Pinggan had retreated a little later, he would have had to face this sneak attack head-on. Ma Xian turned around and glanced up at the smiling guy on the wall. He snorted coldly and stared at Chen Pinggan, who was safe and sound. He spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. Previously, he had been kicked into the sky by Chen Pinggan, so his internal organs had actually been injured. The brawny man reminded the woman behind him, "Coquettish woman, if you don't show some real skills, it'll be very difficult for us to fool him today." The woman said fiercely, "It's all your fault. How can it be so difficult to earn money in the world?" Ma Xian grinned and said, "How could I have known that the gold would be so hot? We agreed to deal with old Demon Ding. I thought this guy was just a small fish and shrimp." Chen Pinggan's attention was more focused on the smiling face on the wall. He was testing them, or trying to see through the depths of this Jianghu. They were also checking Chen Pinggan's real background. The smiling face on the wall clapped again. "Interesting, interesting. Everyone's thinking the same thing." At this moment, a handsome young man with an apricot hairpin slowly walked out from the intersection of the streets and alleys. He held two bloody heads in his hands. It was Zhu Shi. He stood at the corner and looked at Chen Pinggan from afar. He smiled as he lifted the heads in his hands and gently threw them on the ground. Behind him, a beautiful woman wearing wooden clogs slowly walked out. She slowly walked past Zhu Shi, and when she stepped on the bluestone pavement, there was a very clear dripping sound. She also carried two heads in her hands, and casually threw them on the street. She smiled sweetly and said, "Young master, my master grandpa said that as long as you hand over the wine gourd, the child will live. Otherwise, the family of 5 will be reunited." These days, young master has been wandering around the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom. I can see that you're a kind-hearted person. Can you bear to do that? In the house deep in the alley, an old man wearing a silver lotus crown was sitting on a bench and basking in the sun. Beside him was a trembling child with snot and tears all over his face. The old man smiled and said, "Don't be afraid. Your talent is very good. I plan to make an exception and take you as my disciple. Maybe you can become the next leader of the devil cult. Why are you crying? You only lost a few relatives, but you have the hope of owning the entire Jianghu. Child, you've read some books and should be able to calculate this. If you cry again and distract me, I won't be able to trap the little guy in the house. If so, I'll kill you too." The old man raised his head and looked into the distance. "You Zheni, Zhongqiu, I might as well tell you the truth. I've already agreed to protect Zhu Fei. I advise you to kill Tong Qingqing and Feng Qingbai first before dealing with me. Besides, one more outsider means one more chance. It doesn't matter whether you kill me or not. Do you really think I'll be tempted by a golden Arhat body? Then you're looking down on me too much. But I can tell you a piece of great news. If you kill the person on the street, it won't be 10. Apart from 1 life, plus the wine gourd and the legendary Immortal's flying sword in the house behind me, it will be at least 13. Languid, the old man said, "Why don't you and I change our strategy? If we kill that boy, we'll have more choices." Probably because he had received a definite answer, the old man sneered. On the street, Chen Pinggan looked around and said in a low voice, "No need to calculate my state of mind." Smiley Face and Flower Hairpin Man both felt that it was inconceivable. They didn't know why he said that. Only a middle-aged man standing in the shade of a tree in the distance with a sword in his arms opened his eyes. He no longer looked lazy and sneered, as expected. 3:10. The middle-aged man slowly walked out of the shade, holding the hilt of his sword and swinging it left and right. He did not look like a swordsman, but more like a naughty child holding a rattledrum. When he appeared in front of everyone, Ma Xian, lute woman, smiling face, hairpin man Jusha, and crow of the evil cult all changed their expressions. The man did not look at these famous top masters in Jianghu. He just smiled at the young man who seemed to be a fellow swordsman. You think too much. You don't have that much influence. In the past 100 years of Jianghu, only Ding Ying is qualified. You. He stretched out his free hand and shook his finger. Not yet. Under everyone's gaze, the man stabbed the long sword into the ground and held the hilt with his palm. He looked lazy and smiled at the two groups. Don't be in a daze. Continue. If you can't kill him, it won't be too late for me to make a move. Don't worry. I'm only aiming at that kid today. I promise I won't hurt you. Ma Xian spat out a mouthful of blood and laughed. I didn't expect to have Sword Fairy Lu to hold the line. This trip to the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom is not in vain. No matter what the result is, when Jianghu talks about this war in the future, Ma Xian will be mentioned. I can go all out now. Ma Xian bent his back slightly. A tattoo of a tiger down the mountain appeared from his shoulder to his arm. It was amazing. Not only that, there was a picture of a door god on his bulging back. It was a long-bearded man in a green robe holding a long saber. He closed his eyes and leaned on the saber, exuding a strong cold aura. Compared to the tiger down the mountain on his shoulder, it was even more shocking. Smiling Face squatted on the wall and smiled even more. He picked up a grass root from somewhere and chewed it gently. Hairpin man Jusha whispered to Crow beside him. Obviously, Ma Xian also had some lucky encounters and got some scattered opportunities. My father once told me that this is called the art of summoning the gods. In the generational appointment 300 years ago, someone used this art to kill everyone outside the Great Wall. He chased after 2,000 grassland elite cavalry and killed them all. Seeing the gloomy eyes of Lute Woman, the burly man whose aura was rising laughed. How dare I get involved in this mess if I don't have some new skills? Do you really think I care about that bit of gold? The woman said coldly, I'm only here for gold. This money is clean. Ma Xian said sarcastically, what? Don't tell me you're really interested in that poor scholar. How many scholars are so shameless? If he finds out about your past, won't he regret it so much that his intestines turn green with regret? Won't he scold you that you're not even comparable to a prostitute? I didn't accuse you wrongly. From head to toe, which part of your body is clean? Hurry up and get lost. When you and that poor scholar get married, I will definitely reward you with 500 taels of gold. Just treat it as money for prostitution. Jusha laughed and said, you keep calling me your lover, but it turns out that you're actually sincere. The woman with fake fingers and a peeper in her arms showed a trace of hesitation. Smiling Face suddenly said, get married? Before I came here, I had a good chat with a scholar named Jiang. We talked about a lot of interesting stories in Jianghu. Among them, we talked about concubine Peeper's Jianghu past. The scholar was probably stupid from reading too much. He only said that how could there be such a shameless woman in the world? In the end, he didn't even think that concubine Peeper was the person who slept next to him. Alas, since he's a fool, then this marriage can still be done. The woman's expression was sorrowful, but then it became resolute. Chen Pinggan had been watching and listening attentively. He was not anxious at all. Not only because he was on the street and was surrounded, but also because Flying Sword 15 seemed to be imprisoned by the Jingfu again. The sloppy man leaning on the sword was the third martial artist Chen Pinggan had seen. The previous two were the old man with the silver lotus crown and Fan Wn. However, the man in front of him had a much higher martial cultivation than Fan Wn. As far as he was concerned, the gap between him and the old man surnamed Ding was not too big. But even Ma Xian had a trump card. This Jianghu was obviously not as shallow as imagined. If it was Sword 15 in the sword-cultivating gourd instead of level 1, the situation would be better. But it was useless to think too much. He was really attacked from both sides. Jusha smiled and said, Miss Ya, thank you. The woman in wooden clogs said helplessly, Master Grandpa has spoken. I dare not be lazy. But you must remember to save me. The hairpin man nodded and said, destroying a flower is the most tragic thing in the world. I, Jushur, will not let Miss Yaya down. The man with the stiff smile tossed the grass root aside and stood up as well. After stretching his muscles and bones, he rubbed his cheeks with both hands and revealed a sincere smile that was no longer stiff. I want to personally measure the weight of the banished immortal. Lu Fang said hello and reminded him with a smile, the war is imminent. Do you still want to think about these things? Tong Qingqing who hides from place to place, Feng Qingbai who presses forward courageously, and you who is muddle-headed. In fact, they all have their own ways of living. It's just that you have the worst luck. I know you have been deliberately hiding your strength. Be careful not to play with fire. Ma Xian had already raised his momentum to the highest point in his martial arts career in one go. There was no reason for him to delay. His resentment and longing for the woman with the peeper were not fake. Taking the opportunity to accumulate momentum and fight with all his strength was even more real. The tiger down the mountain was like a living creature. Its body shook and brought about bursts of golden light on Ma Xian's shoulders and arms. When Ma Xian clenched his left fist, golden light seeped out between his fingers. He took a step and came in front of Chen Pinggan in an instant. He punched out, causing the air to shake with the sound of wind and thunder. Chen Pinggan did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. He tilted his head and bent his waist, pressing his shoulder against Ma Xian's. At the same time, his right hand pressed against Ma Xian's knee. Ma Xian was thrown 7 to 8 feet away. He staggered a few steps, each step creating a pothole on the street. Only then did he stop himself. The sound of the peeper was heard. 2 snow-white silk threads drew an arc from both sides of Ma Xian and went straight for Chen Pinggan. Ma Xian suddenly stomped on the ground and charged forward again. Chen Pinggan's figure flashed, dodging the attack of the zither strings. Aside from being extremely agile, he also seemed to be dragged forward by something at an illogical speed. Lu Fang's eyes lit up. He laughed loudly, Ma Xian, pay attention to your front. Ma Xian suddenly stopped, plowing out 2 gullies on the street. He stomped his feet heavily and raised his arms in front of him. Sure enough, an inconceivable punch smashed into his arm. Ma Xian roared angrily. The saber-wielding Confucian general with a long beard and azure robes on his back suddenly opened his eyes. Die. Ma Xian just leaned back slightly, stepping forward with one foot. He swung his arm and punched out. His whole arm, overflowing with golden light, drew a golden fan in the air. In the smiling man's eyes, he saw the snow-white robed figure pressing down on Ma Xian's fist with one hand. Then, the figure leaped up and directly jumped over Ma Xian's head. Moreover, the figure stepped on the back of Ma Xian's head and leaped toward the woman who was hiding behind him. The woman with the peeper saw that the situation was not good. Her fingers moved quickly on the strings of the peeper, interweaving a green spiderweb between the two. Chen Pinggan suddenly frowned, changed his direction in an instant, abandoned the peeper woman, and rushed directly to the left. It was the gloomy smiling face. Except for Lu Fang. Among the 2 groups of people who had shown up at present, Chen Pinggan was most afraid of this strange person. The smiling face laughed and said, "It said that picking up a soft persimmon to pinch, but you're good." He opened his arms and fell straight forward. The next moment, the smiling face's figure disappeared in an instant. Chen Pinggan twisted his direction in the air, reaching out to grab the smiling face who had inexplicably appeared behind him. He silently kicked at the back of Chen Pinggan's head. Chen Pinggan actually grabbed nothing. It was simply a teleportation talisman. The smiling face appeared behind him mysteriously again. This time, he curled up his body, spread his arms, and punched at Chen Pinggan's temples with both fists. Chen Pinggan was just about to make a move. Lu Fang's words just happened to be one step ahead, and he generously said to the smiling face, "Be careful, he's about to use his strength." The smiling face hesitated for a moment, and took the initiative to give up the great opportunity to smash Chen Pinggan's head with both fists. In an instant, he stood on the bluestone street. Chen Pinggan almost exchanged places with the smiling face. The latter came to the street, and Chen Pinggan stood on the wall. He glanced at the sword-wielding man who had twice ruined his plans. "Why don't you just make a move?" Lu Fang's palm lightly patted the hilt of his sword, and he said cheerfully, "Ganging up with so many people to gang up on a junior, if word gets out, your reputation will be bad." Chen Pinggan was silent. The blade-strengthening gourd was lifeless, as if the originally open wine pot had been blocked by someone, and there was no longer any fragrance. Chu Yi was like a clay ox in the sea, and there was no movement. He had broken the connection with Chen Pinggan's heart. Not only that, the golden wine robe on his body had also lost its effect. However, losing the golden wine as a protective talisman meant that Chen Pinggan had lost the ability to ignore weapons. However, there was also one additional advantage, and that was that without the restriction of the golden wine robe's spiritual energy circulation, Chen Pinggan seemed to have taken off old Yang's Junqi talisman. Without the invisible restrictions on his hands and feet, his fists would only be faster. Chu Yi disappeared, Chu Yi was trapped, and the golden wine had no magic treasures or supernatural powers. In exchange, he could punch to his heart's content. Punching was about being able to withdraw and release freely. In fact, Chen Pinggan had been withdrawing. Because he was really full of doubts about this Jianghu, the entire capital of the Nanyuan kingdom, and the so-called 10 people in the world. But even if he couldn't figure it out, there were still some things that he had to do. Lu Fang began to point out the world again. "Ma Xian, don't die." Ma Xian made a fist stance, and his left and right arms had turned golden. As he breathed, he spat out little golden light. The long-bearded green-robed martial sage behind him, after opening his eyes, was even more lifelike. From the tip of the sword, a snow-white ball of light lit up, and wisps of light spread to the bones. Soon, Ma Xian's eyes were suffused with a faint silver light. The burly man, like a statue enshrined in the main hall, grinned and said, "This invincible golden body, I was going to try the Imperial Tutor's #1 in the world. Boy, you win. Come, just hit me. If I frown, I lose, okay." Chen Pinggan stepped forward. There was an illusion in everyone's vision, and the whole street seemed to have collapsed a few feet because of this step. A punch, no longer holding back, smashed into Ma Xian's chest. The long-bearded green-robed martial sage image on his back was smashed to pieces in an instant. Ma Xian's burly body flew out with a bang. Chen Pinggan followed like a shadow. Another punch hit, and Ma Xian's body was twisted into an arc. This time, Chen Pinggan's punch changed the angle slightly, making Ma Xian hit the companion behind him. "Lu Fang, save me." The Peeper woman's face changed dramatically. After she cried out in horror, she did not wait for death. As a first-class master, she did not retreat, nor did she dodge left and right. She tiptoed and quickly moved forward, trying to hide behind Ma Xian, who had an invincible golden body. She thought that the guy could not punch through Ma Xian's body. As long as he paused for a moment, she believed that Lu Fang would attack. Chen Pinggan seemed to see through the Peeper woman's thoughts, and the third punch hit Ma Xian's abdomen again. Not only was the golden body shattered, but the originally pale silver eyes immediately turned red, filled with horrifying blood vessels. Ma Xian's back and the Peeper woman who tried to be clever and made a fool of themselves collided. After the collision, the Peeper strings rang out chaotically. After the woman spat out a mouthful of blood, she kicked out with her legs and stepped in the air, retreating backward. It was still too slow. Chen Pinggan's punch penetrated the Peeper in the woman's arms and hit her abdomen heavily. His arm swung out in a half circle, and the woman and the broken Peeper were twisted in the air by the force of the punch. Then, they suddenly crashed into the wall. Her plump body was almost completely buried in the wall, and it was unknown whether she was alive or dead. The Peeper in her arms fell to the ground. In the distance, Lu Fang smiled and still did not attack. Even if that person seemed to treat him as a real enemy. He spoke again lazily, smiley face, "Remember, don't be fooled by the speed of his punches. He can be even faster. Try not to let him get close to you. Try using hidden weapons, poisons, and whatnot." Lu Fang pretended to be enlightened. "Oh, right. The people he really wants to kill are actually Miss Ya and Master Ju." After being shocked by Chen Ping'an's punches, the devil sect woman, did not even have the intention to join in the fun. Even if she were to be punished by the old sect master, it would be better than ending up like Ma Xian. Zhu Shi had already planned to watch from the sidelines. However, when Lu Fang said this, both of them were horrified. As expected, Chen Ping'an moved horizontally. The person facing him was who was wearing wooden clogs. She was just about to move when her eyes suddenly widened, and her face was full of pain. The wall behind her exploded without warning, and an extremely slender longsword appeared. The assassin held the sword with both hands and was as fast as lightning. The tip of the sword pierced through the woman's back. The hands holding the sword were pressed against Ya's back. The assassin continued to run forward, and the poor woman was pushed forward. It was as if a 3-foot sheathless sword had grown out of the woman's abdomen. The tip of the sword went straight for Chen Ping'an. It went straight for the central courtyard. The central courtyard acupoint was also known as the dragon's jaw. It was located on the central line in front of Chen Ping'an. Lu Fang quietly held the sword hilt. But he quickly let go. In the nick of time, Chen Ping'an disappeared into thin air. He had used the last mind talisman. The assassin loosened his grip on the sword and pressed on the back of the woman's head, pushing her forward with all his might. Her delicate body slid off the sword and fell to the ground several zhong away. Her back was slightly loose, probably due to the incessant vomiting of blood. A pool of blood soaked her back. The woman struggled for a moment, trying to flip her body over, but just as her elbow bent a little, she fell heavily onto the street. The assassin was a barefoot young man with rolled-up sleeves. He turned to look at Chen Ping'an, who was adjusting his breathing, and said with a bright smile, "I heard that as long as I kill you, there will be Dharma treasures to be obtained. So I came." He shook out a dazzling sword flower. "My name is Feng Qingbai, a sword cultivator. Being ranked among the top 10 is a share. Together with the share you exchanged for your head, it's a huge profit." Feng Qingbai said helplessly, "It's a pity that I couldn't kill you with one strike. I probably wouldn't have been your match in a head-on confrontation. It's okay, I can cooperate with Lu Fang. He's the only sword immortal here, and he's definitely going to return." Ma Xian, who only knew how to invite gods to descend, had already lost his golden body. The Peeper woman, who was stuck in the wall, did not move at all. There was the intermittent sound of rocks falling to the ground at the base of the wall. A famous demoness of the demonic cult who had secretly supported the dragon for several years was lying in a pool of blood. Her wooden clogs and her snow-white feet were very eye-catching. However, there was still Lu Fang, the self-proclaimed sword cultivator Feng Qingbai, the smiling face, and the hairpin man Zhu Shi. The skinny little girl curled up on a small stool and thought to herself, "Punch after punch. I'll blow their heads off so that I can take off their clothes and boots. They're obviously worth a lot of silver." The little girl looked at the miserable state of the woman in the distance, especially the pair of wooden clogs. She could not help but take a few more glances. She thought to herself that it was no wonder she died so quickly with such gaudy clothes. Chen Ping'an clenched his fists tightly and then loosened them. He repeated this several times. After practicing martial arts for so long, it was time to let it go. At the peak of Yunyu Mountain, the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan Kingdom, Zhong Qiu, had a solemn expression. He was somewhat unsure. He asked in a deep voice, "Is that true? Killing that person will not only give you a new place, but also 3 blessings? Why is it so?" According to the secret records of various countries and the secret files of the Veneration Tower, such a situation has never happened before in history. Could it be Ding Ying's trick? Yu Zhani, who looked like an innocent child, was carefully carving a jade bamboo fan with a carving knife. He rubbed it carefully, as if he was obsessed with the beauty of his skin. Yu Zhani didn't answer Zhong Qiu's question. Instead, he stared intently at the fine lines on the bamboo branch. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. For Yu Zhani, who had already returned to his original state of martial arts, this didn't make sense. As a great grandmaster second only to Ding Ying, Yu Zhani had long been immune to cold and heat. It was rumored that at the age of 70, He had obtained an immortal's secret book and comprehended the will of heaven for decades. He was proficient in magic arts. Some people even said that they had seen Eugenie riding on clouds and flying on cranes and phoenixes. It was at that time that Eugenie's figure and appearance began to change from that of a white-haired old man to that of a young man. After 10 years of seclusion, he successfully broke out and became one with nature. Everyone looked forward to Eugenie, the leader of the righteous faction, to fight with Ding Ying. It would be best if he could kill Ding Ying. From then on, the world would be peaceful. The emperors would not have to worry about being beheaded by him in their sleep. The Grand Masters of both the righteous and the evil factions would not have to rely on him. Even the devil cult's leaders wished that this eccentric ancestor would either die early or achieve the legendary feat of ascension. In short, he did not want to stay in the human world. After 80 years, it was time for someone else to sit on the top seat. In addition to Eugenie and Zhong Qiu, who were both enemies and friends, there was also a beautiful woman wearing a noble robe on the top of Bull Mountain. Her robe was dark green, which was the Empress of the Nanyuan Kingdom. It was only worn during court meetings and temple visits. At the moment, there was the most obedient imperial tutor of the Nanyuan Kingdom at the top of the mountain. Therefore, the woman could only be the Empress of the Nanyuan Kingdom, Zhu Shuzhen. She also had a secret identity. She was the current Lord of the Reverence Tower. She was responsible for ranking the masters in the world once every 20 years. Zhu Fei of the Chunqiao Palace had long coveted Empress Zhu's beauty. Hairpin man Zhu Shi once confessed in the main hall of the White River Temple that if Zhong Qiu was not guarding the palace, his father, Zhu Fei, would have broken into the palace to take her away. Eugenie put down the jade bamboo in his hand and raised his arm to wipe the sweat on his forehead. He gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, which curled up like clouds and lingered around the child's face for a long time. He first answered Zhong Qiu's question, "It should be true." But Ding Ying's mind is unpredictable. Compared to working together to kill the young swordsman who suddenly appeared, Ding Ying's backup plan is more worthy of our attention. Eugenie emphasized, "I'm worried about the situation in Zhuoyuan Alley. Imperial Tutor Zhong, you'd better watch it yourself." He called Zhong Imperial Tutor Zhong Qiu. It seemed that their relationship was indeed very ordinary. Zhong Qiu frowned. Not only is Ding Ying overseeing the situation in Zhuoyuan Alley, but Lu Fang also brought a sword. What's there to worry about? Eugenie shook his head. "I'm worried about Ding Ying and Lu Fang." Zhong Qiu's expression was somewhat unhappy. Lu Fang is a straightforward person. What's there to worry about? Just because he's on the same side as that swordsman? In front of him was the #1 person of the righteous faction, the leader of the Lake Mountain sect, the imperial tutor of Songlai Kingdom, and the old immortal in the eyes of the world. He had always been like this. Although his actions were straightforward, there was a sense of alienation and indifference in his bones. The closer one was to him, the deeper one would feel it. Eugenie said indifferently, "If you're not going, I'll go." Zhong Qiu snorted coldly. Without even looking at Empress Zhu, he swept to the foot of the mountain like an eagle. He became a black dot, and after a few leaps and bounds at the foot of the mountain, he was soon far away from Yunyu Mountain. Empress Zhu sighed. Even someone as strong as Zhong Qiu can't control the wind as recorded in the ancient books. "What about you, Eugenie? Can you do it now?" Eugenie was silent. Zhu Shuzhen laughed. "Even if you can't ride the clouds and the wind, you're still very elegant and unrestrained." When she was still a young girl, she met Zhong Qiu and Eugenie for the first time in the marketplace of another kingdom. The former showed off his ability, while the latter's divine brilliance was reserved, but she was still amazed by them. Eugenie stood up. His height didn't even reach Empress Zhu's chest, but when he stood up, Zhu Shuzhen felt like she was suddenly pushed to the foot of the mountain, and could only look up at the person on the mountain peak. Eugenie asked, "Have you confirmed that there's no mistake about the 10 people in the world?" Zhu Shuzhen nodded. "It's completely confirmed." She couldn't help but sigh. It's like an imperial court examination for officials, but it's not so cruel. Eugenie put his hands behind his back and looked into the distance, looking desolate. The hidden empress of Nanyuan Kingdom asked a question, "Where exactly is Tong Qingqing hiding?" Eugenie was silent for a moment. I think only Ding Ying knows. Zhu Shuzhen turned her head and looked at this high and mighty immortal. How high is Ding Ying's martial arts realm? Yu Zhini said something strange. I don't know if I know. 311. The child was scared to the extreme, but he wasn't that scared anymore. He was the only one left in the world. He was just a child who had just read a few books and didn't know how to compromise. With a face full of hatred, he gritted his teeth and asked, "What's your name?" The old man smiled playfully. The child added, "I'll definitely kill you. I'll avenge my parents and grandparents." The old man with the silver lotus crown pointed at himself and said with a smile, "Me? The world likes to call me Old Demon Ding, and the good and evil are no exception. The disciples of the sect will probably still respectfully call me sect master when they see me. As for my real name, it's Ding Ying. I haven't used it for many years." The old man asked, "Then what's your name?" The child's voice trembled, but he tried his best to raise his voice, "Cao Qinglang." The old man joked, "Your name is too convenient. Plus, with your appearance, you'll be beaten up when you go to Jianghu in the future." He waved his sleeve casually, and a strong wind blew on the window paper of the side room. It buzzed, but the thin window paper was not damaged at all. It was as if something in the room had been knocked back. The child couldn't see this wonderful trick. He was so angry that his face turned blue. Bullshit. His family was dead, and the name given by his parents became the child's last thought. The old man didn't care. He saw a few old hens pecking around in the yard. The old man got up and went to the kitchen. He took out a handful of rice from the rice jar and sat back down. He sprinkled it on the ground. The old hens quickly flapped their wings and came over to eat happily. The old man smiled and said, "The world is afraid of me, but look, they're not." He bent down and leaned forward. Does this mean that the so-called masters, emperors, generals, and ministers are all inferior to a chicken? The child was too young, and his mind was filled with hatred. How could he be willing to think about such things? He could only stare at the great demon who killed without blinking an eye, hating himself for being too weak. He suddenly remembered that there was still a hatchet in the kitchen, but it had not been sharpened much. In the capital, a small family like the child's had the confidence to ask a passing charcoal seller to stop his ox cart. The hatchet in the house was just for show. The old man looked at the sky and answered his own question, "Of course not. The ignorant are fearless." Sometimes, an eagle would fly across the sky, and the mice in the field would quickly protect the grains under their claws. In our world, there are not many people like this, but there are also quite a few. They are not much better than ordinary people, but they can see the shadow. For example, Yu Zheni from Songlai Kingdom, the old chef in the Crown Prince's mansion of Nanyuan Kingdom, and the old monk preaching scriptures in Jinggang Temple. At this point, Ding Ying stood up, shook his sleeves, and flicked his fingers. Again and again, stellar energy condensed into lines that shot toward the window in the side room. Ding Ying's attack was too fast. Dark green gang qi constantly condensed on the other side of the window. It was like a picture of the Milky Way. There are also some foreign visitors who don't come with good intentions. We call them banished immortals. They play the human world like a comet sweeping its tail. They come and go in a hurry. As for how the human world has changed, how big of a mess they have made, and how bad of a mess it has become, they never care. They don't care about the joys and sorrows of the human world. Ding Ying smiled and made a gesture of turning the pages of a book. Then, he clapped his hands gently, as if he was closing a book. These people are like a page of a casual book in their free time. They just turn the page. They don't care if the page says collapse of etiquette and music, thousands of miles of blood, or misery and suffering of people. A family of etiquette that has been passed down for thousands of years, a sage's mansion with a pleasant smell of books, produced a freak who made a mess of it. A small country that lives in a remote corner has an ambitious emperor. He doesn't know anything about military affairs, but he is militaristic. In 20 years, half of the country's young and strong people died. The child didn't understand this at all. He was immersed in hatred. "Then what did you do?" The child named Cao Qinglang sobbed and said, "You only know how to kill my parents and grandparents, Cao Qinglang sobbed with grief and indignation. What kind of hero are you? You're just a heinous devil. The old man seemed to be deliberately teasing the child. He imitated the child's whining and then burst out laughing. It was hard to tell if he was still a child or crazy. The child was trembling with anger. Ding Ying smiled and said, "Actually, what those deities did have anything to do with me? No, I'm just looking for an excuse to kill people, to kill some interesting guys." The old man raised his arm and made a gesture of chopping meat with his palm as a knife. One deity, two deities, 3 or 4. Chop them to death. Apart from them, there are also the top 10 people other than me and the bottom 10 people. If they are interesting, keep them alive. If they are not pleasing to the eye, kill them together. While the child was sobbing, Ding Ying glanced at the sky. This time, it was different from the time 60 years ago. That was why he chose to stay here instead of fighting in person. After all, he was still crazy. He tried to challenge 9 or even more top masters by himself. 60 years ago, someone had tried to do so. He wanted to monopolize the martial arts fate in the world, but he failed miserably. If the young master of the flying sword could survive, everyone would be surprised. Then he, Ding Ying, would leave this place at that time, so that person would not be surprised. Ding Ying knew that this world was like raising venomous insects. Deep in Ding Ying's heart, there was an unknown secret. In order to solve this mystery, he only cared about one thing. If he let the 60 years of raising venomous insects become a waste of effort, would they come to see him? Who exactly would walk in front of him? Before that, there were 2 key points. First, Zhu Shi had to die on the street so that Lu Fang and Zhu Fei would take the initiative to fall into the trap. Second, the master of the flying sword also had to die. Ding Ying looked back at the window and smiled. He didn't think it was difficult. An old man with an aquiline nose was walking on the bustling streets of the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom. He looked majestic without being angry. He should be from the northern region. He was very tall and stood out from the crowd, attracting the attention of many local people. Beside the old man were several male and female guards with clear eyes and vigorous steps. They only glanced at him from the corner of their eyes and suppressed the curious gazes. Living in the most virtuous city in the world, the old man had a lot of emotions. He was used to the vast sky and vast land beyond the Great Wall, so he was not used to the crowds here. Just when the old man was in a bad mood, a vigorous man walked quickly from the distance and told his teacher in a grassland dialect that he had found the man in a place called Kujia Bridge, which was not far away. The old man asked the disciple to lead the way. Soon, they crossed a stone bridge with a long history and came to a shop near the water. It was a silk shop. The old man asked the disciple to wait outside. The business of the shop was quiet and there were no customers. The old man stepped over the threshold alone and saw that behind the low counter, there was only a head with sparse hair that looked crooked. When the shopkeeper saw the old man, he smiled and said, "Oh, what a rare guess. I don't find it strange to see anyone recently, but when I see you, it's like the sun has risen from the west. I don't understand. Although Zhu Fei's son told me in advance that you were coming, I actually didn't believe him. I just thought he was trying to trick me into coming out of the mountain to help his father avoid disaster." The shopkeeper went around the counter and gestured to the old man with the aquiline nose to find a place to sit down and talk. "Great Grandmaster Cheng, please sit down and talk. Otherwise, I have to raise my neck to chat with you. It's tiring." The old man who came from afar didn't care. He sat on a coarse chair used to receive guests and went straight to the point. "If it weren't for the fact that I don't trust the list of the 10 people, I wouldn't have come here to take the risk. You and I are not in the top 5, so there might be accidents. Feng Qingbai, who is undoubtedly a banished immortal, old Demon Ding's grand disciple Ya, and Zhu Fei's son Zhu Shi, there are 3 of them now. Who knows if there are some old bastards and little turtles hiding under the water." The shopkeeper nodded his head in agreement. Yu Zhenyi and Zhong Qiu, the 4 great grandmasters, gathered in Mount Yaonyo. This was the news on the stage for the world to see. This time, Jingyang Lu chose to announce the list of the 10 people in the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom. This was the key to the hidden mystery. The old man from beyond the Great Wall sneered. I use spears and you use sabers. Like Zhongqiu, we both use external martial arts. We are different from that old fox Yu Zhenyi. As long as it is a battle to the death, there will be more or less hidden injuries. The three of us definitely won't last 60 years. For this opportunity, I have fought all the way until today. I have to account for all the hidden injuries on my body. At the end of his words, the old man gently patted the chair's handle. The chair was safe and sound, but the floor of the shop under the chair was already filled with cracks. The inner disciples of the old man outside the shop felt the flow of qi in the room. They were all as if they were facing a great enemy and breathed heavily. The shopkeeper smiled. Your disciples don't have much aptitude. Didn't I hear that many years ago, you found a talented little wolf cub in the grassland? After all these years of careful training, he won't be inferior to Ya and Zhu Shi, these gods' favored ones, right? The old man surnamed Cheng said indifferently, he's dead. It's not good if his aptitude is too good. The shopkeeper said angrily, Cheng Yuan Shan, even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. Do you still have any humanity? This old man who came all the way from beyond the Great Wall to Nanyuan Kingdom was the 8th of the 10 people in the world, Saint Cheng Yuan Shan. 20 years ago, after he entered the list of the 10 people ranked by Jingyang Lu, he quietly went to the grassland beyond the Great Wall and quickly became an honored guest of the master of the grassland. Cheng Yuan Shan looked askance at this short old man who concealed his name in Nanyuan Kingdom. Liu Zong, you have the nerve to talk about me. Whetstone, what do you like to use to whet your blade? The whetstone, Liu Zong, chuckled. Cheng Yuan Shan said doubtfully, I just came here and Nanyuan Kingdom is Zhongqiu's territory. Which side is Zhongqiu on this time? At first, I thought it was Yu Zhenyi, but now it seems that it's not necessarily so. What does old Demon Ding want to do? He's the one who doesn't need to do anything in the world, yet he came to Nanyuan Kingdom's capital. What does he want? After the shopkeeper Liu Zong was mentioned by the Saint Cheng Yuan Shan as the grinder, his imposing manner rose sharply for a moment, but it immediately slackened again. His entire person once again became a small old man in the shop who only knew how to seek personal gain. He pointed at Cheng Yuan Shan and teased, oh you just like to think too much. But Cheng Yuan Shan was well aware that Liu Zong did not delay his cultivation in the slightest over these years, and even improved further. But in the region of Nanyuan Kingdom, Zhongqiu had been overseeing the imperial palace for so many years, so there were no shocking rumors. Without a whetstone, how could Liu Zong's martial arts not retreat but advance instead? In these years, other than secretly slaughtering the masters beyond the Great Wall, Cheng Yuan Shan also sneaked into the south many times. Among them, he killed 2 Jianghu masters who had the potential to enter the top 10. He did this in order to sharpen his state of mind in dangerous battles, not daring to slack off in the slightest. Cheng Yuan Shan said, this person, Zhu Fei, does things without restraint, too much like those banished immortals in history. This time, he also relied on Ding Ying. Whether it's a blessing or a curse, tell me. Liu Zong, other people cannot be trusted, but you are an exception. Liu Zong laughed and said, why should you trust me? Cheng Yuan Shan said solemnly, the people in Jianghu who are called martial arts fanatics are as numerous as the hairs on a cow, but in my heart, the only true martial arts fanatic is you, Liu Zong. You, Ding Ying, Zhongqiu and Yu Zhenyi are the same. You are one of the few people who survived that chaotic battle. Those 10 people, some died, some disappeared. Only you people who were at the periphery of the situation, each of you obtained a chance. Ding Ying obtained the Taoist crown left behind by the immortals, Yu Zhenyi obtained an immortal's secret manual. I am not sure what Zhongqiu obtained, but you, Liu Zong, took the initiative to give up that demonic knife, just to have a knife by your side. This kind of choice, only you can make in this world. Liu Zong twirled his sparse beard and said with a smile, this kind of secret, you are an outsider who did not personally participate in that disaster, how did you know? This matter could be said to be the most itchy part of Liu Zong's life. He could not tell ordinary people, but when Saint Cheng Yuan Shan took the initiative to reveal it today, Liu Zong, the person who sharpened the knife, was immensely pleased with himself. Cheng Yuanshan answered honestly, "The new owner that the demonic knife refiner chose was personally killed by me, but I was unable to keep it." Saint Cheng Yuanshan had always been proud and arrogant. He looked down on people like Jingshin Pavilion and Tong Ching Ching who were on the ranking list. As for the 10 people outside of the 10 who were judged by busybodies, Cheng Yuanshan had directly spread the word that these people could serve him tea and water, so-and-so could take off his boots, so-and-so could help guard his door and courtyard. These 10 top experts whose names shook the world, none of them could enter Saint Cheng Yuanshan's eyes. But today, when they came to see Liu Zong, they were extremely polite, to the extent that Cheng Yuanshan was even willing to lower himself. From this, it could be seen that Cheng Yuanshan did not have the slightest bit of confidence in coming to Nanyuan Kingdom's capital city. Liu Zong stuck a finger into his mouth, picked out the remaining shredded meat from the previous meal from between his teeth, and casually flicked it. Whether a butcher's skill is good or not depends on the knife he uses the most. How many years can he use it to peel skin, chop meat, and remove bones? The worst has to change to a new knife after 2 or 3 years, the better ones can use it for 7 or 8 years. My knife has been used since my debut in Jianghu, until today, it has been used for nearly 40 years. Liu Zong chuckled and said, "It's exciting to kill those shrouded immortals. The knife that has been sharpened for decades, don't let it become the bullshit dragon slaying technique in that book. It's good that it's here, it's just right that it's here." A scholar from a cold clan who came to the capital city to take the imperial examination was still waiting for his beautiful wife to return. For her, he did not even care about the teachings of the saints that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen. They met by chance on the road and met in Jianghu. Although she was older than him by 6 years, she often liked to joke, saying that she was not a good woman, but he did not care. To be able to play such a beautiful peeper, to be able to have an intense passion on the battlefield, to have hidden bitterness in the boudoir, she could not be bad. There was a strange fellow who came to him and told him about a woman from Jianghu. The scholar felt that if the woman that the person said was true, then she was indeed evil to the core. However, the scholar felt that the woman that he knew was different. He felt that she was a good woman, knowledgeable and reasonable, gentle and virtuous, and she was so beautiful that he could marry her and grow old together. He was waiting for her to return home. He thought that after seeing her, he would tell her these thoughts. Jingang Temple, the largest forest in Nanyuan Kingdom's capital city. It was also the world's largest Buddhist holy land with the most monks. In a secluded and remote location of the temple, there was a simple and crude thatched cottage. The door was opened, and the empty house was empty except for an old monk and a futon. A thin and handsome young master, surrounded by more than 10 stunning beauties, slowly walked towards this inconspicuous thatched cottage. The women's ages ranged from 13 to 40 years old. All of them were beauties. If there were people from the Venerate Pavilion here, they would find that among them, there were famous fairies and heroines, and there were also noble ladies from powerful clans. Without exception, they were all stunning beauties. There were many banners around the thatched cottage. The young man was like a prince's son traveling with beauties. Along the way, he explained to the women the origin of Buddhist words such as shafang, forest, instant, and banners. Most of the women were of superior birth, and there was no lack of knowledgeable people. Some smiled and pointed out a few mistakes of the young man. He did not explain anything, only saying that the customs of different places were different, and the saying in his hometown was more in line with the purpose of Buddhism. The meditating old monk opened his eyes and asked with a smile, "Almsgiver Jew, since you have already received Ding Ying's promise to firmly occupy a place, why are you still here?" The young man surnamed Jew raised his hand, indicating that the women should not follow him. He walked toward the thatched cottage alone and smiled, "For my worthless son to ask for a set of Arhat golden body from the master." He approached the threshold, lifted his foot, and politely asked, "Do you want to take off your boots? I am afraid of dirtying the master's clean abode." The old monk smiled, "The soil on your boots is clean. In Almsgiver Jew's heart, does it matter whether you take off your boots or not?" The young man said helplessly, "You baldies like to say such useless nonsense wherever you go. I really don't like it." He pointed to the bare walls of the house. "It seems empty, but you are still here." The old monk sighed, Almsgiver Jew has the root of wisdom. You understand all the principles, but it is a pity that you are not willing to turn back. The young man still took off his boots. After crossing the threshold, he sat on the edge of the door. He raised an arm and pointed at the beautiful women behind him. If they are the Dharma that I seek, how will you persuade me, monk? The old monk said with a bitter face, it is really tiring to argue with you banished immortals. The young man put on an act, bowed his head and put his palms together. He smiled and chanted Amitabha. The old monk's haggard and bitter face became more wrinkled and frowned. If it was an ordinary hoodlum, they would not be able to enter the Jingang temple. Even if it was the high officials and dignitaries of the Nanyuan kingdom, they would still not be able to find this thatched cottage. However, this seemingly weak young man in front of him was called Ju Fei. He was the fourth great guru in the world. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he had reached the peak of martial arts. He was also proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. It was true that those women liked him. Perhaps at the beginning, they were forced to do so. They already had a man that they liked, or even a loyal woman who married early to help their husbands and children. They were forcefully taken to the mountain by Ju Fei or the minions of the Chunchao Palace. However, after being together for a few short months, or 3 to 5 years, or even more than 10 years, there was not a single person who was not moved by Ju Fei. This was a very strange thing in Jianghu that did not make any sense. The lower levels of Jianghu always liked to describe the emperor of the mountain of the Chunchao Palace as a fat and ugly pig or a ruthless person who killed people easily. However, this was not the case. Regardless of the Jianghu vendettas, Ju Fei was not only elegant but also had a youthful appearance to the women he liked. Ju Fei smiled and said, "Father and son, ascending together. Isn't that something to look forward to?" The old monk sighed and said, the golden body of the Baihe temple was indeed hidden by this poor monk. However, after 60 years, Almsgiver Ding appeared in the capital again and immediately moved to the Nanyuan Imperial Palace. "Almsgiver Ju, you are late." Ju Fei stared at the old monk's eyes. After a moment, he changed the topic and asked, "I heard that there is a green robe floating around the capital that cannot be seen by the naked eye. Old monk, have you seen it?" Without waiting for the old monk to answer, Ju Fei narrowed his eyes and said in a serious tone, "I hope you have seen it." Murderous intent was revealed. The old monk seemed to be in silent meditation, but he could also be weighing the pros and cons. Once Ju Fei said that he would kill everyone in the Jingang temple, he would definitely do it. There would not be a single young acolyte or sweeping monk left. Ju Fei laughed heartily and put away the thick murderous intent. The Arhat golden body and flying robe of the Nanyuan kingdom, the protective armor of the Songlai kingdom, and the demon knife beyond the great wall that can break all spells. In the past 60 years, a total of 4 treasures have appeared in the world. If the person who gets it is one of the 10, his position will naturally be more stable. The masters who are close to the 10 are like tigers that have grown wings, and there is hope to squeeze out some unlucky wretch. The old monk seemed to have made up his mind and put down all his burdens. His expression was much calmer, and he asked Ju Fei in a casual manner, "Almsgiver Ju, is Buddhism flourishing in your hometown?" Ju Fei twitched the corner of his mouth. "Over there, it's hard to say." The old monk asked again, "Some books record the trivial words that you banished immortals mentioned. They say that people who have attained the Tao can burn a great lake with one hand, break a mountain with one punch, turn into a flying sword with one breath, and take the head of a person from 1,000 miles away. They can ride the wind and sweep across rivers and seas, and can capture a flood dragon with one hand. Is it true?" Ju Fei was about to speak. A woman in white flew over and landed directly outside the thatched hut. Her face was full of fear. Young master was seriously injured in Zhuoyuan Alley. Ju Fei's face was full of displeasure. "What?" The cold and moving young woman wanted to say something but stopped. She knelt down with a thump, trembling all over. The corner of Ju Fei's mouth twitched. He slowly reached out and covered his forehead. Lu Fangfang, not only are you an idiot, you are also a good-for-nothing. You can't even protect my son." The jade-white palm on his forehead had 5 hook-like fingers, as if itching to open the top of his head. Ju Fei retracted his fingers, patted his knee lightly, and suddenly waved his sleeves behind him. The beautiful woman kneeling outside the hut flew out with a bang like a broken cloth bag. Before she landed, she was already smashed into pieces in the air. The women behind made way for her, but many of them were splashed with blood. None of them dared to show the slightest bit of resentment. It might not be a bad thing. Ju Fei exhaled heavily and smiled. Old monk, let's continue talking. After we are done, I will go and settle some family matters. The old monk was speechless. Ju Fei did not force him. He asked, how did you get so seriously injured? Only then did he realize that the woman was already dead. Ju Fei reached out his sleeve and quickly made a hand seal. It was a spell that was not recorded in any Buddhist or Daoist sects in the world. The faint figure of a woman appeared outside the hut. Even after death, she was still terrified. She floated timidly towards Ju Fei. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound was made. However, Ju Fei was the only one who could clearly hear it. The old monk sighed. There was always someone better than you. 3:12. Ju Fei twirled his fingers and the woman's soul condensed into a snow-white bead at his fingertips. He gently put it into his sleeve and looked up at the old monk of Jingang Temple. Without his previous casual tone, he said straightforwardly, back to the matter of that dress, I know it has something to do with you. Zhong Qiu even came to the temple to look for you because of it. But the old monk was still unwilling to talk about serious matters. His eyes were filled with nostalgia as he looked at the lush green forest outside the house. I have a junior brother. When we were young, we practiced Buddhism together. He said that he couldn't bear to see sad stories in the world. When he saw it, he couldn't help but think that there was a Buddha in the world, but the world was still like this. Even if he became a Buddha, what could he do? Later on, I left the small temple in my hometown. I wonder if that junior brother, has he become a Buddha? Ju Fei suppressed the anger in his heart and shook his head gently. He sneered, how can he become a Buddha in such a small place? Old monk, you think too much. The old monk shook his head and said, I just want to know if my junior brother is still alive. After so many years, I miss the porridge that my junior brother made. Ju Fei was about to stand up. I won't go around in circles with you. I'll send you on your way. Go and ask your junior brother if he still knows how to make porridge in the underworld. The old monk's face was indifferent. He smiled and said, if I help you get the golden body of Luohan in the palace, can you promise me one thing? Ju Fei sat down again and found it interesting. Me. The old monk stretched out his hand and touched his bald head. He sighed and said, I don't want to be a monk anymore. I was abandoned at the entrance of the temple when I was young and was kindly taken in by my master. Back then, my junior brother and I were always thinking about this and that. In fact, we always wanted a comb. Ju Fei held his stomach and laughed. The old monk took off his outer cassock and folded it neatly. He put it aside and said softly, please help her find a way to escape. Don't be trapped in this small place anymore. A green dress with big sleeves fluttering in the wind appeared in a corner of the house. The beauties outside the house had served Ju Fei for many years and were knowledgeable. But when they saw the dress fluttering in the air, they were still stunned. The dress floated to the old monk's side and the hem of the dress slowly fell to the ground. Finally, it was in a kneeling position. After the old monk took off his kasaya, he was no longer so particular about his words. For so many years, I have been the Shudeng monk and the preaching monk of the scriptures of Jingang Temple. Day after day, year after year, I have recited thousands of lines of scriptures and dharma for them to listen to. All kinds of people, 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 they just listen to me. One of the sleeves of her dress was lifted up to cover her neckline, and she put on a smile that was covering her mouth. The old monk stared at Ju Fei. Can you do it? Ju Fei was not in a hurry to give an answer. The old monk of the Vajra temple was a Buddhist saint of this world. He was skilled in writing, and his words were like a Vajra pestle, majestic and imposing. The old monk turned to look at the green dress and said helplessly, she's different. Although Ju Fei was a banished immortal who had been enlightened for a long time, he did not dare to claim to know all the rules. After all, before he descended, he had to endure some true immortal secret techniques that could imprison his soul. Mirror Heart Chamber, Jin Gang Temple, Reverence Tower. The masters of these three places had gone through many catastrophes and accumulated experience. They might not know less than him. The old monk smiled. Almsgiver Ju, I'm completely relieved to hear you ask. Ju Fei muttered to himself, as far as I'm concerned, the best situation would be to take Jusha with me. But what if there was an accident, such as the current situation where Jusha was heavily injured and had almost no chance of sneaking into the top 10? I needed to make sure that after I left, Jusha would have a higher chance of making it into the top 10 after 60 years. Jusha, Y-A-R, Fan W-A-N-R. No matter who they are, if they go to a bigger world, as long as someone is willing to take care of them, they will definitely shine. At this point, Ju Fei could not hide his anger. Lu Fang is an idiot. He clearly saw through it but never really saw through it. Where am I going to find him, a master's wife or a junior sister? Back then, he had the nerve to stab me with a sword. The old monk looked up. Ju Fei suddenly raised his hand and a letter appeared between his fingers. Looking down at the content, Ju Fei laughed out loud. Heaven is helping me. He turned to look at the stunning beauties with their own merits. Ju Fei sighed in his heart and was full of regret. Not to mention Tong Qingqing, who he did not need to hope for, just compared to Nanyuan Kingdom's Empress Ju Shuzhen, Mirror Heart Chamber's Fan Wn, and the evil sect's Ya, their martial talent was still too far behind. Nanyuan Kingdom's Crown Prince Wei Yang, who was dressed in casual clothes, led two people through the corridors of the Crown Prince's residence. One of them was Wei Yang's master. The old man was short and thin like a monkey, but he was a true martial arts master in the world today. The other person was Fan Wn, who was worshipped as a goddess by the Jianghu disciples of Nanyuan Kingdom. She was a fairy who came out of Mirror Heart Chamber. Wei Yang's expression was strange. He was a little embarrassed, but more than that, he was glad. But because his master was beside him, he could not show it. The old man who taught Wei Yang advanced martial arts said angrily, "Good guy, hiding under my nose for so many years, I didn't find him. Now that we meet, I want to ask for advice from the real skills of the 10 people in the world. The Imperial Tutor is a rare hero in the world, and I have always been convinced. But I don't believe that a cook who cooks can be so powerful." The old man cursed. It turned out that Jingyang Lu had just released a new list of the 10 people in the world. Their names, where they were, and the level of their martial arts were all concise and concise. Ding Ying and Yu Zhenyi were all familiar faces, but one of them seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and was hiding in the Crown Prince's residence in the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom. His identity was actually a cook. There was a tall old man who was full of smoke and fire and smelled of oil and salt. He was squatting outside the orderly and spotless kitchen, holding a handful of golden fried soybeans and throwing them into his mouth one by one. Inside, the disciples and grand disciples he had brought up were busy preparing today's lunch. When the old cook saw the figure of Crown Prince Wei Yang, he sighed with a frown on his old face. He was very quiet. Wei Yang ordered the cooks, handymen, and maidservants to disperse. The old cook did not say anything to stop him. He squatted in place and sighed as if he had accepted his fate. The short old man, who had been so aggressive earlier, suddenly lost his arrogance when he met this grandmaster on the list. He became silent and stared at this old man who was hiding in the imperial court. The old cook kept glancing at Fan Wan. He took a quick glance and immediately retracted his gaze, as if he could not help but take another look. Even Fan Wan felt a little strange. Wei Yang was a little apprehensive. Could it be that this old man was not serious? Among the 10 people in the world, except for Spring-Tide Palace's Ju Fei and the female Tong Qingqing, no one cared about the beauty of the mortal world. The old cook's first sentence was very intimidating. "Do you know how many types of banished immortals there are?" Wei Yang and the skinny old man looked at each other. Because Fan Wn came from the Mirror Heart Chamber, she knew some inside information. The old cook picked up a fried soybean and put it into his mouth. There is only good food left in the world, and it has not failed. If even this is taken away, then I can only go and be a drunkard. The old cook no longer looked at Fan Wan. He threw half of the fried soybeans into his mouth, clapped his hands, and stood up. Banished immortals have descended to the mortal world to experience the mortal world. One type is like Zhu Fei and Feng Qingbai, who knew early on and came to the mortal world to seek something. Therefore, their way of doing things is shocking in our eyes, but in their eyes, it is right and proper. However, the things these banished immortals seek will not be too deep. Also, your Mirror Heart Chamber's Grandmaster, Tong Qingqing, seems to be hiding from something. The second type is like Lu Fangfang, who awakens later, but will definitely wake up at a certain juncture. There's another possibility, which is just my guess. They've spent their entire lives trying to fulfill their wishes, so they've never been able to wake up. They live one life after another in a daze. Over time, their hometown becomes their hometown, and the foreign land becomes their hometown. This type of person is more special. Often, their appearance is outstanding, and their martial arts talent is very high. However, in the eyes of outsiders, their achievements are always a little bit lower than the highest. The old cook stared at Fan Wan again. But sometimes, this type of person will inevitably have a violation of the rules smell on them. The so-called possessed by demons and possessed by ghosts in the streets have something to do with this. Little girl, do you feel that there's something strange about yourself recently? Fan Wan hesitated for a moment and nodded. Twice. The old cook nodded and said with a smile, "Old Demon Ding is amazing. There is no one in the mortal world who cannot be killed. There is no one in the mortal world who cannot be forgiven. He is not inferior to that lunatic from back then, and is even smarter. I think he will most likely get what he wants this time. Eugenie wants to protect this world, and in my opinion, he is also amazing." However, in the eyes of some people, his scope is still too small. On the contrary, Imperial Tutor Zhongqiu, who has always been suppressed by Eugenie, traveled the mountains and rivers of the 4 nations and the 8 winds by himself a few years ago. I think he will have a bigger chance. The old cook sighed. As for me, the more I say, the more I do, the more mistakes I make. If I don't ask, I will die. In the past, I wanted to make a fuss, but the more I see, the less I have the heart. In this chaotic situation, Demon Ding and Eugenie are sworn enemies. With the two of them watching, no one on the list can escape. As for me, I am no longer curious about what the banished immortal is. I am satisfied if I can live for another 20 or 30 years, so. Old Chef suddenly made a move. His 2 fingers formed a sword seal and pierced several of his vital acupoints. Instantly, blood dripped from his body. In the eyes of Eugenie and banished immortal Chen Pinggan, his aura that was close to that of a Dao-fusing cultivator was instantly shattered. Old Chef fell from being one of the top grandmasters in the world to an expert even weaker than the skinny monkey. He chose to voluntarily withdraw from this turbulent situation. The old cook's face was pale, but his smile was relieved. He asked Crown Prince Wei Yang, with such a big Crown Prince mansion, it shouldn't be a problem to raise an old man for another 20 or 30 years, right? Of course, if you really need my help, Your Highness, you can ask. Wei Yang nodded. Mister, just rest in the mansion. I will not disturb your cultivation. At the peak of Yunyu Mountain, Zhu Shuzhen, who had just walked to the foot of the mountain, came back with a secret letter. She smiled bitterly and handed it to Eugenie. Eugenie took the letter and read its contents. He frowned and asked, "What's going on?" Zhu Shuzhen said helplessly, "It must be from the venerated tower, but it's definitely not the work of our venerated tower." Eugenie looked up at the sky. When one stood at a high enough place and looked at the mountains and rivers, the human world would be a spectacular sight. However, it was difficult to stare at a person closely. Eugenie had a deep understanding of this. For example, in his eyes, he could see old Demon Ding, Chen Pinggan, and Lu Fang in Zhuoyuan Alley. Their light spots were especially dazzling. Further away, there were 2 light spots in the Jinggang Temple and 4 in the Crown Prince Mansion. Among them, the brightest spot suddenly dimmed. This kind of distant observation did not consume the spiritual energy that Eugenie had accumulated over the years. However, if Eugenie wanted to look at someone closely, he would have to pay a high price. In the house near Zhuoyuan Alley, old Demon Ding, who was wearing a silver lotus crown, suddenly received a secret letter from the venerated tower. At the end of the letter, the old man's eyes lit up. There was such a good thing. Even Ding Ying was a little tempted. He glanced at Cao Qinglang and clicked his tongue. Little girl, you're so lucky. As for that outsider, he must have been ruthlessly tricked by someone. Otherwise, he would not have been suppressed so severely. In the history that Ding Ying knew, there had almost never been such an open intervention during the 60-year cycle. No banished immortal had been beaten like this. 313. Regardless of their original intentions, the three groups of people who had besieged Chen Pinggan, the 7 famous Jianghu experts, including the Pink Vaja Ma Xian, the Peeper Woman, and the demonic cult's Ya, had all died on this street. Feng Qingbai, who had traveled the world as a ranger, was a madman. He would do anything to achieve his goal, including breaking walls and sneaking attacks. He failed to assassinate Chen Pinggan with one strike, and instead, he lost half of Ya's life. The clog-wearing beauty, who was expected to inherit the demonic cult's sect master as a woman, had yet to turn around. One side of her face was pressed against the cold street, and the beautiful nails of one slender hand gently slid across the bluestone. She looked at Zhu Shu, her eyes full of pain and pleading. Although she had been joking before, asking Zhu Shu to promise not to let her die here, he had still agreed. Why was he still unwilling to act? Zhu Shu did not feel guilty at all. He even looked at her and smiled as a greeting. Lu Fang still did not act. The elusive smiler face had already fought with Chen Pinggan and did not gain the slightest advantage. Zhu Shu held the scarlet prayer beads in his hand and twirled them gently. I, Zhu Shu, am the one who is holding you back. But I promise I will do my best to deal with this person. Mr. Lu, smiler face, Feng Qingbai, can we put aside our prejudices today and face the enemy together? Smiler face nodded with a frightening smile. No matter who kills this person in the end, I only want one of his abilities. If I can't get the immortal technique of shrinking into an inch, the reward will be calculated separately. Feng Qingbai gazed at Chen Pinggan with a burning gaze. The final strike to kill him must be delivered by me. As for all his possessions, I won't take a single one of them. I can also hand over the magic treasure he obtained after killing exiled immortal. You can decide how to split the spoils. Zhu Shu looked at the dying Ya and smiled. I only want her. Lu Fang made the final decision. Then it's settled. Feng Qingbai held his sword horizontally in front of him as he bent his fingers and gently tapped the sword's blade. He said with a teasing smile, Sword Immortal Lu, don't just stand by and watch. Be careful not to end up worse off. In the end, all of us will become his martial Dao whetstones. You are the most capable expert on our side. If you continue to hide and use our lives to test the waters, I won't be willing to serve you. At most, I won't meddle in this matter. You guys can do whatever you want. Lu Fang smiled and said, don't worry. After saying this, the bird's eye peak Sword Immortal, whose palm was pressed against the sword hilt, clenched his fist and pulled out the Dachuan sword and scabbard from the ground. Immortals once recorded in books that in ancient times, there was a tree named Dachuan. It lived for 8,000 years in spring and 8,000 years in autumn. After it had ripened, mortals who ate it would be able to ascend to the heavens. Chen Pinggan had been silently accumulating strength. Furthermore, he had to adapt to his state without the restraints of the Daoist robe. Among the fist techniques taught by Old Man Kui, the Steaming Cloud Swamp style and the Iron Cavalry Chisel Formation style were fine. They were just different in terms of the weight of the punch. However, for a fist technique like the Deity Drumming style, the slightest difference could lead to a huge difference. Furthermore, he had to constantly be on guard against Lu Fang. Chen Pinggan had to grasp the propriety of every punch. This was the peak of Chen Pinggan's fist technique ever since he started practicing martial arts. His physique, soul, essence, and spirit were all the same. It's coming. Be careful. Lu Fang reminded everyone with a smile. Seriously, you didn't even give a warning before making a move. You don't have the bearing of a grandmaster. At the same time, with a twist of his wrist, Lu Fang held the hilt of his sword seriously for the first time. After holding the famous sword Dachuan, because Lu Fang's sword qi was too abundant, even if he deliberately suppressed it, it still continued to pour out, causing his clothes to flutter even though there was no wind. Especially the sleeve of the hand holding the sword qi was abundant and surging endlessly. The cuff of the sleeve was wide open, and there were actually wisps of hissing sounds coming from inside. In an instant, Smileyface's heartstrings tightened. Without saying a word, he used the incomplete immortal secret technique that he had obtained by chance. With the mysterious Chiman Duanjia, he instantly moved from the Zhen position to the Khan position. However, before Smileyface could see Chen Pingan's figure, the fist aura had already arrived in front of him and hit him in the face. A wisp of sword light suddenly crossed between Smileyface's head and the fist aura. The incomparably sharp blade was placed horizontally. In Smileyface's eyes, it was as if a snow-white thread was placed in front of him. The fist was blocked by the blade, giving Smileyface a little room to maneuver. His figure disappeared several times and he retreated again and again. It was not easy for him to get rid of the suffocating pressure. Smileyface had roamed Jianghu for 30 years since his debut. Originally, his favorite enemy was a grandmaster of external martial arts. He advanced and retreated freely, teasing those so-called grandmasters who were slightly slow in their movements, like walking a dog. This was also the origin of Smileyface's nickname, Troublesome Ghost. Several old guys who were famous for their Honglian kung fu were forcefully exhausted to death by Smileyface, who appeared like a ghost. This was the first time Smileyface had met a boxing master who could run faster than him. Smileyface knew that Feng Qingbai could save him once, twice, but there might not be a third time. Thus, he no longer held back. As he retreated and dodged, his hands were hidden in his sleeves. Between his fingers, there were small and exquisite handleless flying knives with cold blade light. The blades were smeared with dark green poison, which was the best way to break a martial artist's gang qi. 50 or 60 feet away from Chen Pingan, Smileyface saw that after Feng Qingbai's sword had saved him, he had also paid the price. He was closely watched by that person. After 2 or 3 rounds, Feng Qingbai was at a disadvantage. A leg swept across his shoulder and Feng Qingbai flew out with a bang. Feng Qingbai, whose white robe followed like a shadow and one of his arms drooped down, was obviously in a bad situation. Return the favor. Smileyface's flying knives flew out again and again from his sleeves. That person was truly a monster. When he punched this time, every step he took seemed very light. When he stepped on the street, Smileyface almost thought that the person's boots did not touch the ground at all, as if they were always floating in the air, let alone the pink Vaja Ma Xuanqing's momentum of breaking bricks and stones with his feet. Smileyface did not have the extravagant hope that his 6-hook kisses would be able to stab that person. He only wanted to buy Feng Qingbai a chance to catch his breath. Feng Qingbai grinned and spread his fingers. He actually let go of the long sword. A swordsman abandoning his sword. Seeing this, Smileyface felt a wave of guilt. Could it be that the wanderer Feng Qingbai, who had traveled from the north to the south for 10 years, who had almost single-handedly killed through half of the martial arts world, was only this capable? Feng Qingbai's long sword did not fall to the ground. Without a master to control it, the body of the sword trembled slightly and rippled. Then, it suddenly tightened. The long sword hovered in the air, the tip of the sword tilted up, pointing directly at that white robe. It flashed and disappeared. Feng Qingbai shook his left shoulder. He had been swept by the whip leg. There was a piercing pain, but it was not a big deal. Feng Qingbai put 2 fingers of his right hand together to form a sword seal. In this narrow and oppressive little world, sword cultivators could not use their supernatural powers. However, Feng Qingbai could already use the inferior swordsmanship to the point of perfection. Feng Qingbai had come down this time to temper his sword. He used all methods to temper his sword intent and heart as much as possible. Attack and defense switched. On the street, There was a ball of white snow and a streak of white light. Hairpin boy Ju Shi first carefully helped Ya up and let her sit at the foot of a wall to prevent her from inexplicably dying under the sword chi and fist aura of the two sides fighting. Feng Qingbai's sword that pierced through her back was truly fierce and ruthless. It had actually directly destroyed Ya's dantian. Not only that, there was still a strand of sword chi lingering in her body, preventing her from circulating her chi to heal. If there was no expert to help her and strip away that strand of sword chi, she could only wait for death. Even the sacred healing medicine of the Titanium Temple would not be of any help. Of course, Ju Shi did not flirt with her in the midst of the battle. He crouched in the shadow of the wall and slightly increased the force of his thumb. One of the string of prayer beads wrapped around his fist was pushed out. The scarlet bead did not roll down casually. It bounced twice on the blue flagstones on the street before vanishing into thin air. Ju Shi kept scattering the prayer beads. This was a protective talisman that his father, Ju Fei, had given him. If used properly, it could protect his life against 10 people in the world. If he faced 10 people below him, it could kill them. Of course, the master of the Spring-Tide Temple had also warned Ju Shi that if he encountered Ding Ying and Yu Zheni, he should run if he could. If he could not, he should kneel and beg for mercy. It was not shameful. Feng Qingbai strolled leisurely as he moved slowly, and he chased after the white-robed man to his heart's content with the sword control technique. Chen Pinggan tried to shake him off a few times, yet he was still entangled by the swift flying sword. The flying sword was so fast that one could only see the sword light flowing. Smilerface did not dare to do anything unnecessary. He silently adjusted his breathing in the distance. Seeing this scene, Smilerface was relieved but also a little frightened. If he encountered Feng Qingbai, how would he deal with him? The white-robed man suddenly stopped and reached out to grab the hilt of the flying sword. Feng Qingbai was not afraid. How can it be so simple? You definitely won't be able to catch me. Before Feng Qingbai could finish his words, Chen Pinggan held the hilt with his right hand and chopped at the sword with his left hand. The sword did not break, but the tip of the sword was raised high, forming a huge arc. Feng Qingbai's fingers paused. Chen Pinggan also put 2 fingers together and quickly wiped the blade of the sword, just enough to flatten the long sword. He held the sword horizontally in front of him and then loosened his fingers. While Feng Qingbai was in a daze, he was grabbed by the back of the collar and thrown back more than 10 feet. The tip of the sword almost pierced through Feng Qingbai's heart. Chen Pinggan moved his fingers slightly and the flying sword flew back. It lingered around his body like a little bird. I know how to control the sword too. 3:14. Not only had Feng Qingbai's weapon been snatched away, his heart had almost been pierced through by the guy's sword-riding technique. Not only did he not feel humiliated or infuriated, his eyes were even glittering, and he felt that things were finally a little interesting. The rules of Jianghu still had to be followed. Feng Qingbai was saved by Lu Fang. He stood behind the famous half-sword immortal and thanked him. Looking at the handsome back with his sleeves full of sword chi, Feng Qingbai was a little envious. He had only achieved what he had today by relying on his family and sect. Although his talent was not bad, he did not deserve the reputation of being unworldly or once in a century. Lu Fang was different. A person like Lu Fang would be the most outstanding swordsman in any world. Lu Fang, who had his back to Feng Qingbai, smiled. You're welcome. If you want, I can continue to help you, provided that you have the guts to take back that sword. Feng Qingbai reached out and rubbed his left shoulder. He shook his head helplessly and said, "It's not difficult up there. Unfortunately, I'm destined to not be able to take back that sword here." Lu Fang nodded. "Then you can watch the battle from a close distance." Feng Qingbai smiled knowingly. "The mountains are high and the rivers are long. There will be rewards in the future." Feng Qingbai's trip this time cost him a great favor from his master, who helped him cross the 10,000 mountains with a light boat. He became a banished immortal who had been enlightened for more than 10 years. He gave up his identity as a sword practitioner and stole a body with a decent foundation. Then, He started all over again as a Jianghu swordsman who was purely a martial artist. He challenged masters from all walks of life. There were benefits, but it was far from enough for Feng Qingbai to reach his masters so-called from afar to near. Before coming down, Feng Qingbai and his master had a long talk. In addition to a sword practitioner also had a natal flying sword. Even if they were hundreds or thousands of feet away, they could kill people without leaving a trace. A Jianghu swordsman emphasized that he was invincible within 3 feet. Therefore, Feng Qingbai wanted to comprehend swordsmanship from a close distance. Fortunately, watching the white-robed swordsman and Lu Fang fight was also a cultivation. Feng Qingbai still had the vision and temperament. As for today's victory, Feng Qingbai didn't care. In fact, most of the exiled immortals didn't come to this world for invincibility or complete victory. It was more related to their mental state. Yaa slumped against the wall, sweating profusely. She was barely able to stop the blood from gushing out. She didn't even dare to look down at the wound. The Peeper woman who had been smashed into the wall had blood all over her face. After struggling for a while, she finally fell to the ground. With her back against the wall, she slowly stood up. She looked at her beloved Peeper. After traveling the Jianghu together for so many years, it had already become a piece of junk. She really didn't have the strength to pick it up. She didn't even look at the situation on the street. With one hand pressed against the wall, she staggered forward. The pitiful woman's face was frighteningly pale, as if she was going to a place that she had to go to. Ma Xian had yet to wake up, and it was possible that he would never have the chance to do so in this lifetime. Zhu Shi's forehead was covered in a fine layer of sweat. Just from the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of the white-robed swordsman riding his sword. Zhu Shi's heart was weighed down by a huge rock, and he almost couldn't breathe. It was not easy to urge those pearls to take root. First, he had to cut off and scoop out a wisp of qi from his body, and then carefully inject it into the pearls. Then, according to the immortal formation map that his father, Zhu Fei, had taught him in private, he used the method named dragon slaying to arrange the pearls as if they were chess pieces. Only then could he be considered to have succeeded. During this period, he couldn't make a single mistake. Each pearl contained the immortal qi that Zhu Fei had plundered and collected from everywhere. Zhu Fei had once asked him to hold a divine weapon and attack at will, but Zhu Shi couldn't hurt the pearls at all. This time, he had followed his father to the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom. He always thought that victory was in his grasp, and he had the mentality of joining in the fun. He only needed to hide in the shadows behind his father and old Demon Ding, sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, and watch others live and die. However, Ding Ying didn't act according to common sense, forcing him to accompany Yaa into danger. His father was dead, and there was still a chance. But he, Zhu Shi, was dead. If he wanted to return to the human world as Zhu Shi, it was as difficult as ascending to heaven. Moreover, with his father's temper, as long as he, Zhu Shi, died halfway, he might not even bother to look at his own corpse. He definitely wouldn't spend the slightest bit of effort. The reason why Chen Pinggan didn't take advantage of the victory to pursue, other than Lu Fang's obstruction, was that he was familiar with the weight of the long sword, and the quantity of vital qi required for its various flying trajectories. The more precise, the better. A sword master's so-called command of the sword as one's arm had just crossed the threshold. More importantly, he had entered a kind of spiritual connection realm. This was a false realm that imitated a sword cultivator's command of the natal flying sword. It was like a rough copy of a book, but the imitation also had its true meaning and great knowledge. In fact, Lu Fang had been hesitating. Because old Demon Ding was nearby. If he chose to use all his strength to deal with the white-robed swordsman, it would be easy for the eccentric Ding Ying to act violently. When Ding Ying attacked, he never cared about rules or identity. Perhaps he would even use all his strength to deal with a low-level martial artist that he disliked. Moreover, Lu Fang was worried about the safety of Zhu Shi. At this moment, Lu Fang and Chen Pinggan looked in the same direction at almost the same time. It was a tall and thin blue-robed old Confucian. He walked with a stern demeanor, clearly one of the few grandmasters on this mountain peak. However, He did not interfere in the confrontation between Chen Pinggan and Lu Fang. Instead, he turned from the street into the alley and headed for the courtyard where Chen Pinggan was temporarily staying. The imperial tutor, Zhong Qiu, was facing Ding Ying. If there was anyone in the world who dared to use 2 fists to fight old Demon Ding, and was even willing to fight to the death, it was not the immortal Yu Zhenyi, who vaguely surpassed the realm of martial arts, nor was it Bird's Eye Peak Lu Fang. It was only Zhong Qiu. In this way, Lu Fang truly had no misgivings. Lu Fang slowly unsheathed his sword. Every inch of the Darchuan unsheathed, an inch of dazzling brilliance appeared in the world. It was so dazzling that the smiling face almost narrowed his eyes. The skinny little girl, who had always wished that no one could see her, shrank back on the bench. Just as the smiling face was about to narrow his eyes, she widened her eyes and carefully watched the sword light spread from 1 inch to 2 inches. She did not shrink back even with her face full of tears. When the Darchuan was halfway out of the sheath, she suddenly turned her head. She felt as if she was going blind. Even if she closed her eyes, in front of her was still snowy white. She stretched out her skinny little hand and gently wiped her face. The reason why she stared at that person unsheathing his sword was purely because she felt that the scene was very beautiful and wanted to grab it in the palm of her hand. Every time she walked next to the fragrant stalls early in the morning, she would greedily look at the various delicacies in the steamers. She wanted to snatch them and run away, find a place to hide, and throw them away when she was full. It would be best if no one could eat them and they all starved to death. Zhong Qiu came to the outside of the house. The courtyard door was not closed, so he walked straight in. Ding Ying saw the world's #1 martial artist who had practiced external martial arts to the extreme. She smiled and said, "It's been 60 years since we last met. Zhong Qiu, are you in your 70s this year?" Zhong Qiu looked at the scene on the window and the movement in the side room and frowned. Ding Ying stood on the steps. She was not annoyed by Zhong Qiu's silence. She still took the initiative to speak. "You didn't believe what I said in the past. Do you believe me now?" Ding Ying had seen the world. In the 100 years of Jianghu, there were only a few people who could catch Ding Ying's eye. And in this number, a few had died. Zhong Qiu was one of them. Everyone thought highly of Yu Zhenyi. They felt that Zhong Qiu, the imperial tutor of the southern court, was superior. Compared to Yu Zhenyi, who had left the mountain peak and entered the sea of clouds, he was still slightly inferior. However, Ding Ying had never thought highly of Yu Zhenyi. She only praised Zhong Qiu. 60 years ago, during the Nanyuan Kingdom War, Ding Ying had been involved from the beginning to the end. At that time, Yu Zhenyi and Zhong Qiu were just youths who had taken advantage of the situation to fish in troubled waters. After the war ended, Ding Ying met the two inseparable people and said that Zhong Qiu would definitely be a grandmaster in the future. Zhong Qiu asked Ding Ying 2 questions. "What are you going to do? What are we doing? Let's sit down and talk." Ding Ying sat on a small stool. She waved her sleeve and another stool floated to Zhong Qiu's side. After the latter sat down, Ding Ying said slowly, "Before answering the 2 questions, let me ask you first. Do you know where you are?" Zhong Qiu looked solemn. "There's always someone better than me. I know." Ding Ying smiled and nodded. "Compared to you looking for traces of the banished immortals from secret files, I'm more direct. In the past 60 years, I've killed many banished immortals with my own hands. Some of them were enlightened, while others were still dreaming. I got a lot of information from them." He stomped his foot. "Our place is called Lotus Blossom Blessed Land. It's one of the 72 blessed lands. The territory of the 4 nations, plus the territories that have yet to be developed, we think it's very big. Even the banished immortals think it's too small. According to them, our Lotus Blossom Blessed Land can only be considered a mid-level blessed land. They determine the level of a blessed land. Apart from the abundance of spiritual energy, the population is also very important. Lotus Blossom Blessed Land isn't vast, but there are many martial arts talents in this land. It's always been the best place for the banished immortals to train their minds." Zhong Qiu had been pursuing the truth for many years and had speculated. However, after hearing Ding Ying's words, his calm mind changed. There was even anger on his face. Only now did Zhong Qiu begin to understand Eugenie's pressure. Because he cultivated immortal techniques, other than Ding Ying, Eugenie stood higher than anyone else and could see further. Therefore, he had an unimaginable apathy towards the disputes in the martial world and even the changes in the imperial court of the four countries. Ding Ying smiled. However, the truly strange thing about this lotus blossom blessed land is, at this point, Ding Ying laughed involuntarily and looked up at the sky. People? Immortals? Ding Ying continued, it said that it's much harder to enter our blessed lands than other blessed lands. It depends on the person's mood, or rather, fate. In the hometown of the so-called banished immortals, compared to the Cloud Cave blessed land controlled by a sect called Jade Gui sect, Tongyi Continent's Lotus Blossom blessed land isn't very famous. There are very few stories about it. If Zhu Fei and Lu Fang are the sons of aristocratic families who were sent out to become officials, their official careers are step by step. However, most of them are people who accidentally barged in. Whether they can get out or not depends on luck. Zhong Qiu pointed to the sky. If that's the case, that sky beyond heaven is called Tongyi Continent. Ding Ying smiled playfully. Who told you that it has to be above our heads? Zhong Qiu was deep in thought. It was rare for Ding Ying to meet someone who was worth talking to. Not only did he not have the airs of the most powerful person in the world, but he also did not have the arrogance that everyone thought he had. Instead, he was like an extremely patient old teacher who was explaining to his students. Now, I can answer your second question. What are we doing? Every 60 years, the top 10 masters who make the list and survive until the end will be chosen by that person and leave this place. After that, everyone will have a great opportunity. Those who are superior can ascend with their bodies and souls intact, while those who are inferior can only send their souls to other places. Zhong Qiu asked, so even if the venerable tower has to dig 3 feet into the ground, they have to find the real top 10 masters and evaluate them on the list to prevent people from deceiving others and sneaking in? On top of that, in order to prevent anyone from hiding too deeply, they purposely added items that could improve their cultivation and a godly weapon after killing a banished immortal. Was it to encourage the top 20 cultivators to gather and kill one another? Regarding the venerable tower that is stirring up trouble, there are many inside stories that are deeper than you and I think. Without the venerable tower's warning every 20 years, the world would not be so chaotic. Ding Ying chuckled. However, there are loopholes that can be exploited during this period. Zhong Qiu was worthy of being the imperial tutor of Nanyuan Kingdom. He understood immediately. The strong get stronger and gather together for warmth. They strive to work together and finally divide the benefits. Let's not talk about the past. This time, Eugenie is doing this. He does not distinguish between good and evil and tries to rope in the top 20 masters to target you, Ding Ying, and at the same time encircle the banished immortal. Speaking of this, Zhong Qiu frowned again and looked at Ding Ying, seemingly puzzled. Ding Ying laughed. You're right. The safest way is for the top 10 to know their place and draw close to me early on to seek protection. As long as I leave the demonic cult, act justly and conscientiously, and set good rules for the world, then those who have a chance to enter the list will rely on their own abilities and talents. In the end, I will judge your ranking and whether Eugenie is in the top 3. Then, at least for the next 60 years, the world will be peaceful. There will be no need to fight and spar. Zhong Qiu thought carefully and confirmed that Ding Ying was not spouting nonsense. Ding Ying tapped his knee lightly with his fingers, appearing particularly leisurely. But I feel that this is meaningless. Zhong Qiu asked the same question again. What do you want to do? Ding Ying waved his hand and still did not answer this question. Instead, he changed the topic. You only need to know that the situation has changed this time. There is no such thing as the top 10 or not. The last 3 people to ascend can take away 5 people, 3 people, and 1 person from this world. Ding Ying emphasized, any 3 people. Zhong Qiu's expression was normal. Ding Ying's mouth twitched. Dead people are fine, as long as they really appeared in history. If you choose those dead people, they will not only come back to life and regain their intelligence, but they will also become loyal puppets. Isn't it interesting? Several people immediately appeared in Zhong Qiu's mind. The founding emperor of the Nanyuan kingdom, Wei Xian, whose spear arts were divine, was known as the best in the last 1,000 years. The founder of the demonic cult, Liu Baixiang, was the most notorious leader of the demonic cult in the last 500 years. The sword immortal Sui Yuyu, who was worshipped by Yu Zheni. The number one person in the world before Ding Ying, the complete madman Zhu Lian. These people were all worthy of the title of number one, but without exception, they all died in the human world. Emperor Wei Xian died at the age of 120. Liu Baixiang died in a siege by dozens of top masters. Sui Yuyu died in front of everyone while riding a sword to ascend. Countless people saw with their own eyes the process of her falling back to the human world. Her flesh and blood melted, and her bones were left standing. She turned into ashes. Zhu Lian, who was seriously injured, died in Ding Ying's hands. The silver lotus crown was also placed on Ding Ying's head. Zhong Qiu asked, "Why?" Ding Ying smiled. "You ask me, but who should I ask?" Zhong Qiu looked directly into Ding Ying's eyes. "You, Zhu Fei, and Lu Fang are already 3 people." Ding Ying smiled. "So now you have 2 choices. Go kill Lu Fang, or join forces with Yu Zheni to try to kill me." Zhong Qiu was silent. Ding Ying said playfully, "But I advise you to wait. Maybe you don't have to kill Lu Fang." Zhong Qiu asked, "If you want to leave, which 3 people will you take with you?" Ding Ying pointed at Cao Qinglang, who was standing at the door of the kitchen. "If I want to leave, I will only take him with me." Zhong Qiu glanced at the child and said doubtfully, "His aptitude is not outstanding." Ding Ying laughed it off. Without any restraints, Lu Fang struck with his first sword. After the strike, an extremely long ravine about 5 feet high was split open from where Lu Fang stood to the end of the street. Not to mention people like Ya and Zhu Shi, who were born and raised here, even Feng Qingbai was dumbfounded. It was as if he was in his hometown, Tongya continent. Smileyface's smile became even more vivid. It was good to lean against a big tree and enjoy the shade. In his early years, he became friends with Lu Fang, who was at his lowest point. At that time, he was hot-blooded and accompanied him to the Chunqiao Palace. Under the circumstances at that time, he accompanied Lu Fang to his death. Then, Lu Fang knocked Smileyface out at the foot of the mountain and climbed the mountain alone to challenge Zhu Fei. When Smileyface woke up, Lu Fang was sitting beside him. He was no longer the frustrated person who drowned his sorrows in alcohol. For many years after that, Smileyface was the only one who could climb Lu Fang's bird's eye peak and come down alive. Zhu Shi was the most helpless. Wouldn't the formation that he had painstakingly set up be useless? The only flaw was that the young white-robed swordsman had run away. The moment Lu Fang struck with his sword, he seemed to have confirmed that he could not block the mighty power of the sword. He moved sideways and directly crashed into the wall, disappearing just like that. Lu Fang looked around and did not feel that the person had retreated. A seemingly casual slash of the sword had split open a door on the wall. Dust flew. A white-robed figure could be vaguely seen dodging the flood-like sword chi and disappearing again. Lu Fang knew that if this continued, no one would be able to hurt each other. His killing power was greater than his opponent's, but that person could dodge every time he struck with his sword. Unless someone made up their mind to exchange lives with the other party. For example, Lu Fang retracted most of his sword chi and gave that person a chance to get close. Or that person was willing to bet that he could withstand Lu Fang's 2 strikes to kill enemies and protect himself, and then kill Lu Fang with a punch. Lu Fang raised his sword. A huge crescent-shaped sword chi appeared in the air and whizzed over. The white-robed figure hurriedly gave up on charging forward and fell rapidly, dodging the sword chi. Lu Fang floated up to the top of the wall. That person dodged several times, but Lu Fang did not see Feng Qingbai's sword. It was a little strange. Lu Fang only saw that person standing on the raised eaves of a roof in the distance, his sleeves swaying slightly. Coupled with the vermilion wine gourd at his waist, he did not look as simple as floating in the air. His vigorous fist intent was one with heaven and earth, and his fist intent was heavy and clear. It was extremely difficult. Even Lu Fang, who was famous in the Tongya continent, had to admit that as long as this young banished immortal with mixed martial arts could leave the lotus flower-blessed land alive, his future achievements would not be low. If one fishing rod could not catch fish, then he would change his method and cast a fishing net. Lu Fang raised his arm and brandished his sword. Apart from the sword in his hand, there were 36 identical famed swords hovering in front of Lu Fang. They were like infantry in a formation, orderly and heavily guarded. The long swords slowly moved forward, and then suddenly accelerated, breaking through the air. Chen Pinggan dashed across the rooftops, twisting and turning. Streaks of sword chi that had turned into white rainbows exploded around him one after another like maggots in a tarsal bone. In addition to controlling the 36 sword chi swords and using them as arrows, as long as Chen Pinggan widened the distance, Lu Fang would advance appropriately. He always maintained a distance of 300 feet, not giving Chen Pinggan a chance to rush in front of him. Of course, Lu Fang wanted to kill Chen Pinggan with his sword, not to play a game of cat and mouse. But when Chen Pinggan could get close, when he mistakenly thought that he could decide victory with one punch, Lu Fang would set a trap for Chen Pinggan. But before the 36 swords were used, that person began to run toward Lu Fang. His agile footsteps stepped left and right, not in a straight line. Lu Fang was slightly surprised and sneered in his heart. So soon. His 5 fingers moved slightly, and the last 6 flying swords suddenly scattered, drawing an arc in the air, and finally the sword tips converged at a certain point. That place happened to be the place that person had to pass through when he punched. In a flash, the 6 flying swords behind that person exploded together with a loud bang, creating a huge commotion. Sure enough, it could be even faster. Lu Fang was not surprised at all, nor did he panic at all. The real sword in his hand swept across. The sword chi condensed into a line. This sword seemed to directly divide the capital of the Nanyuan kingdom into 2 layers. Instead of retreating, Chen Pinggan moved forward and punched at the sword light with an indomitable will. Blood sputtered in front of him. Lu Fang's eyes were indifferent, and he just chopped down with his sword. Up and down, and then left and right. But in an instant, Lu Fang instinctively stepped on the roof, and then a flying sword above his head flew from behind Lu Fang to Chen Pinggan. Lu Fang had a lingering fear. Feng Qingbai's sword must have been left near the wall all this time. It seemed to rashly knock away the sword, but it was not for the sake of punching at all. It was to play the sword master's sword, and attack from the front and back. Chen Pinggan reached out and grasped the long sword. Just a little bit more and he would have been able to pierce through Lu Fang's heart. But there was no regret on his face, and he said in his heart, "Go." Lu Fang was shocked. He did not have time to warn hairpin boy Jusha on the street. He could not care about anything else, and followed closely behind, throwing the big sword in his hand toward the wall. Lu Fang was slightly distracted, and used the real sword controlling technique, so as to avoid making a mistake and killing people instead of saving people. Feng Qingbai's sword passed through the wall, and just happened to stab at the back of Jusha's head. Almost at the same time, Lu Fang's big sword was slightly tilted and nailed into the wall, colliding with the flying sword from a higher place. At the critical moment, the big sword collided with the flying sword, causing it to fall. It only pierced through Jusha's shoulder, and the huge penetrating force caused the hairpin boy to stagger forward. Lu Fang suddenly raised his head. A white robe fell like a meteor, arriving in front of Lu Fang through the hole in the roof, and a fist arrived. Lu Fang's entire body slid backward, and he crashed into the wall. The second fist arrived. The deity's drumming style. Lu Fang took the full brunt of the deity's drumming style in this straight line, and kept retreating. The wall that Smiling Face and Chen Pinggan had been standing on earlier was also smashed into pieces by Lu Fang's back. Lu Fang tried to use the big sword to save himself, but found that he did not dare. He could only condense his chi to protect his body. After all, the big sword was only a divine weapon of this world, and not the lifebound flying sword that Lu Fang had left behind in the Tongya continent. Chen Pinggan resolutely delivered the 10th punch. Lu Fang crashed into the building on the other side of the street, and just like the Peeper woman from before, he finally dove into the wall, bleeding from his 7 orifices. He was in an extremely sorry state. But Chen Pinggan also paid the price for his insistence on this punch. A person appeared beside him, and a fist landed on Chen Pinggan's temple. It was as if a bell had struck him on the head. Chen Pinggan flew backward for more than 10 feet, and half-squatted on the street. Beside his feet was the ravine that had been split open by Lu Fang's sword Qi. The person who interrupted Chen Pinggan's drumming style was dressed in a Confucian green robe. He stood there with one hand behind his back and the other clenched in front of him, looking calm and composed. Chen Pinggan turned his head, spat out a mouthful of dark green blood, and wiped the corner of his mouth. The skinny little girl who happened to be between the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan kingdom and Chen Pinggan had been curled up on a small stool at the foot of the wall from the beginning to the end. She secretly glanced at the person in the white robe. He was indeed powerful, but now he was a little pitiful. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she realized that the person who had asked her to sit still was looking at the old man who looked like a schoolmaster, but he was also looking at her. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she realized that the person who had asked her to sit still was looking at her after he slowly stood up after being punched. He was probably saying, "Don't be afraid." She clearly knew that her life was linked to his. Once he died, she would most likely die as well. But she could not help but be filled with hostility. She wished that he could beat that old bastard to death in the next moment. This kind of emotion was indescribable. It was just like when she saw the little snowman in the small wooden box. She liked it so much. Since she could not have it, she would throw it away, destroy it, and die. She felt that there was nothing wrong with this. "3:15, 2 flying swords broke through the wall one after another, severely injuring the flower hairpin man who had just collected all his prayer beads. Then, Lu Fang, who had the upper hand, was punched back to the street. The last punch even made Lu Fang sink into the wall. Finally, the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan kingdom, Zhong Qiu, came to end the fight. Zhong Qiu, who was known as the best in the world, defeated the young man with one punch and saved Lu Fang, who had no power to fight back. Feng Qingbai took the opportunity to take back his sword. Not only that, he also tried to find a chance to return Dachuan to Lu Fang. However, Zhong Qiu's appearance made Feng Qingbai give up the idea. Feng Qingbai let out a long breath. If Zhong Qiu's punch had hit his temple, he would probably have to rely on his sect to save him. Otherwise, he could only reincarnate in the lotus flower-blessed land again and again. The foundation of a cultivator was constantly being melted and integrated into this world. The world was the furnace, and everything was copper. This was the principle. And that person's servant was the one who was responsible for fanning the flames. That person never showed up and was unwilling to see the world. Only a little Daoist servant with a palm leaf fan was responsible for the operation of the entire lotus flower-blessed land. Of course, he also dealt with the earth immortals of the Tongyi continent who were qualified to know the inside story of the blessed land. Before Feng Qingbai came down, under the guidance of his sect's patriarch, he met the servant. Even the unpolished Jade Realm ancestor had to pay respect to the little guy who was very aggressive. After coming to the lotus flower-blessed land, just a dozen years later, it felt like a lifetime had passed. Feng Qingbai had a feeling that his tempering of the Grand Dao Sword Heart this time had probably come to an end. If his luck was good, then he would at most obtain an immortal artifact of the magic treasure rank. After all, his combat power was now complete. On the other hand, Lu Fang had already fallen. His Taoist heart might be damaged. Even if he returned to the Tongyi continent, he would be in big trouble. Banished immortal, banished immortal. It sounded good, but in fact, it was not. Only Zhu Fei, who advocated that if you don't enjoy life, you're no different from plants and animals, came down and did not touch the foundation of cultivation at all, so it was naturally easy and comfortable. However, people like Feng Qingbai and Lu Fang were extremely dangerous. Senior Tong Qingqing, even though she was already the sect master of the Mirror Heart Chamber and one of the 4 grandmasters in the world, had still hidden for decades and had yet to show up. She was a perfect example. Putting away his messy thoughts, Feng Qingbai began to review the battle, trying to figure out as much as possible. Previously, he had been observing this peak battle from afar. Stones from mountains could be used to polish jade. This was the borrowing of one's state of mind on the path of cultivation. It was similar to the Buddhist meditation method. In Feng Qingbai's eyes, the battle at the Lotus Flower Blessed Land was actually not inferior to the battle between the Golden Core cultivators and the nascent soul cultivators in the Tongye continent. The battle between the white-robed young man and Lu Fang was already so exciting. If Ding Ying and Yu Zhenyi from both the righteous and evil side finally made their moves, what kind of spectacle would it be? Initially, Feng Qingbai did not think highly of Chen Pinggan. This was because Lu Fang was indeed a potential sword immortal who was famous throughout the Tongye continent. He had already gone against the current under heavy suppression in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, where the spiritual qi was thin. He had opened up a new path and once again touched the threshold of the way of the sword. Lu Fang's sword could attack from afar and defend from close range. However, the result was unexpected. The divine hand that broke the situation was that the person actually saw that Lu Fang would save Zhu Shi. It was rumored in the Jianghu that Lu Fang and Zhu Fei were sworn enemies. Lu Fang had even climbed up the mountain with his sword and had a life-and-death battle with Lu Fang in the Spring Tide Palace. Feng Qingbai had already been in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land for more than 10 years, while the young man had just arrived. Logically speaking, he should be even more unfamiliar with the scenery of this peak. Feng Qingbai really could not understand. A battle should have been clear to the onlookers. Could it be that the young man had not only descended with a complete body and soul, but was also familiar with the inside story? Was that why he had broken the rules and was seen as a traitor by the way of the heavens here? He had to be suppressed and eliminated. Although his injuries were serious, his entire shoulder was smashed. Fortunately, it was only an external injury. Zhu Shi used the Spring Tide Palace's healing medicine that Zhu Fei had made and barely stopped the bleeding. He leaned against the wall with Ya and said with a bleak smile, "I've already done my best." The romantic and elegant hairpin man had attracted the blushes of countless beauties. Unfortunately, there was no romance now, only desolation. Ya was trying her best to suppress the chaotic qi with a secret technique of the demonic cult. This was the martial arts manual of the Chuehua sect, one of the 3 sects of the demonic cult. It had the effect of making withered trees bloom. Rumor had it that a certain sect master of the Chuehua sect had tricked the saintess of that generation of the Mirror Heart sect into peeking at half of the true scripture of pureness. The scripture could rejuvenate people. The sect master of the Chuehua sect could be said to be a genius. He had reverse-engineered the scripture for his own use and compiled this secret technique of the demonic cult. However, the after-effects were huge. Although the user could forcibly suppress the serious injuries, they would rapidly age and accelerate the decay of the body. Ya's face was livid. Wisps of white frost appeared on her temples. Zhu Shi sighed. If he handed over a bronze mirror, would Miss Ya, who was most proud of her appearance, directly go mad? Zhu Shi did not know whether to comfort her or himself. "Don't worry, my father will be here soon. By then, I'll be safe and you won't die." At the foot of the wall in the distance, there was a broken peeper lying alone on the ground. Its owner was nowhere to be found. Every once in a while, there would be drops of blood on the ground. When Chen Pinggan stood up, Feng Qingbai, who was holding a long sword, Zhu Shi, who was sitting on the ground, and Smiling Face, who had gone to check on Lu Fang's injuries, all felt their hearts tighten. Lu Fang pulled himself out from the wall and landed lightly on the ground. His body was unstable, and the Smiling Face wanted to reach out to support him. Lu Fang shook his head, and with a stretch of his hand, he pulled the Dachuan back. Along the way, the sword and the scabbard fused together, and the long sword once again stabbed into the ground. Lu Fang's cultivation base in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, which could be said to be exceedingly high, had fallen to rock bottom. The 10 fists god-beating drum style continued to beat Lu Fang, who did not have an outstanding physique, until his soul almost scattered. Lu Fang's eyes darkened. He turned to Smiling Face, whose real name was Chen Tang, and said, "Let me rest for a while. Accompany me for a drink." Smiling Face nodded sadly. Just like the first time they met in Jianghu, he was the frustrated person again. Lu Fang chose to take the lead this time. In addition to protecting Jushu, it was more for Qian Tang. Smiling Face was not among the 20 people in the world. Before coming to the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom, Lu Fang said that he would take Qian Tang to his hometown to see the real immortal Yufeng. At that time, although Lu Fang's words were flat, he had the unique spirit of a sword immortal from Bird's Eye Peak. Even a blind person could feel Smiling Face. The two left the street together. Before Lu Fang left, he cupped his fists and thanked Zhong Qiu. Then he told Jushu to take care of himself. When they arrived at the wine shop where the woman was selling wine, the woman saw the man who stole the sword. Her strong muscles were useless as she cursed and swore. Lu Fang persuaded her in every way possible before she brought 2 pots of the worst wine to the table. She slammed them down hard. The smiling Qian Tang almost couldn't hold back from slapping this gossipy woman to death. Lu Fang took out a simple and unadorned small kai from his bosom and handed it to Smiling Face. He said in a deep voice, "In the next 20 years, I may trouble you to do 2 difficult things. One is to carry this thing with you and find my reincarnation. If you get close to me, the small kai will be boiling hot and let you feel it. The second is to find a long sword called Chaoyuan. I won't force this matter. Maybe it will be like this Dachuan and become someone else's sword." Smiley Face looked surprised. "I have made up my mind." Lu Fang did not explain further. "Take the small kai after drinking this pot of wine, quickly leave Nanyuan Kingdom. If you stay here, you will only make me die faster." Smiling Face had never seen Lu Fang so serious. He could only carefully put away the small kai and nodded in agreement. After drinking the wine, Smiling Face looked at his best friend. Lu Fang said indifferently, "If you really find me, don't worry about anything. Especially don't deliberately teach me martial arts. I will remember." Smiling Face did not smile anymore, his voice carrying a sobbing tone. Lu Fang did not have any sorrow. After silently sending Smiling Face out of the wine shop, Lu Fang turned his head and looked in a direction. He sneered, "You can show yourself. I am the head of a banished immortal. Take it with your ability." A stooped old man walked out from the corner, coughing as he walked. If Smiling Face Qian Tang was still by Lu Fang's side, he would definitely recognize this old man who would be blown away by the wind. The 8-armed immortal Shui Yuan, one of the top 10 people of the older generation, was squeezed out of the top 10 20 years ago. He deteriorated day by day and was at the bottom of the bottom 10. He was once pestered by Smiling Face for a year and became a joke in Jianghu. Lu Fang sighed in his heart. He did not expect Bull Jiang's prophecy to come true. At that time, Yu Zhini secretly gathered heroes and named Ding Ying, Zhu Fei, Tong Qingqing, and Feng Qingbai, the 4 banished immortals. Lu Fang laughed and asked if he counted. Now it seemed that the answer was obvious. It might not have been Yu Zhini's original intention. However, seeing Lu Fang heavily injured and defeated, Yu Zhini naturally would not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Bird's Eye Peak sword immortal has fallen to such a state. If I did not see it with my own eyes, I would never believe it. Shui Yuan grinned and teased Lu Fang. The old man was missing a few teeth. He walked slowly towards the wine shop. It was hard to imagine that this was the world's #1 external martial artist before Zhongqiu. Lu Fang laughed. "Yu Zhini is generous to let you come and take his head." Shui Yuan bent his back and stopped 20 steps away from the tavern's entrance. "Perfected Yu is an immortal of the present age and not a mortal like me. You wouldn't think much of this bit of opportunity. Besides, Great Sword Immortal Lu still has 30 to 40% of his strength. He still has some chance of winning against an old Shui Yuan." Lu Fang sneered. "Great Sword Immortal? You've seen him before. Are you worthy?" Shui Yuan continued to chuckle. "Not worthy, not worthy. Whatever Great Sword Immortal Lu says." Lu Fang's eyes were filled with mockery. Shui Yuan met Lu Fang's gaze and shook his head. As the 8-armed god shook his back and raised his head like a flood dragon, Shui Yuan's aura changed completely. This was the bearing of a grandmaster who had once ranked among the top 10 in the world. Shui Yuan's expression turned dark and terrifying. He was furious and his words were filled with resentment and resentment. All of you high and mighty banished immortals deserve to die. Yes, that's the look in your eyes, Lu Fang. Even if you're clearly a featherless phoenix, you still look at everyone in the world the same way, like you're looking at ants. Lu Fang did not comment. However, he knew that today was the last battle of his life. It was not enough to satisfy him. It was like that with that young man, and it was even more sullen to fight Shui Yuan, who was taking advantage of the situation. At this moment, Shui Yuan, who had just removed his concealment, was like a god descending to the world. However, his body stiffened in an instant. Someone was strangling him from behind and lifting him up bit by bit. Shui Yuan was like a snake that had been hit at its weakest point. He did not even struggle as his feet were lifted higher and higher off the ground. The person who had ambushed the old man said with a warm voice, "What's wrong with looking at you like ants? There's nothing wrong with that. You are ants to begin with." With a crack, Shui Yuan's neck was broken and he was gently thrown to the side of the street. The Wine Jiu woman shrieked. The customers of the tavern were shouting that they had been killed and the birds and beasts scattered. Without Shui Yuan blocking his line of sight, that person was an elegant young master. It was Zhu Fei, who had rushed over from the Diamond Temple. Zhu Fei was still holding a head that had died with its eyes open. He threw it forward in front of Lu Fang. The head rolled and was dripping with blood. It was smiling face Chen Tang. Zhu Fei casually threw out the little kai. Lu Fang slowly squatted down and gently wiped the face of the head, making his good friend close his eyes. Lu Fang stared blankly at smiling face. He did not look at Zhu Fei, nor did he pick up the little kai. He only asked with a trembling voice, "Why?" Zhu Fei was silent for a moment and did not answer the question. Since when did Lu Fang become a wishy-washy good-for-nothing? You came here to break through the barrier of love, but in the end, you couldn't break through. If that's the case, you can just return empty-handed. In the end, you can't even pick up a dead person's head that's no better than a stranger's. Lu Fang, even if you return to the Tongya continent, let alone ascending to the upper 5 realms, I firmly believe that you won't even be able to stay in the nascent soul realm. Zhu Fei squatted down. "Tell me, why did you come here? I'm the head of the Jiang clan of the Jade Gui sect. Why did I accompany you in this lotus flower-blessed land for so many years?" It was unknown when, but the sword Dachuan had been placed quietly at Lu Fang's feet. Together with the little kai and the head, they were all lying on the street. In the distance behind Zhu Fei stood a group of devastatingly beautiful women. Some of them were as slender as willows, and some of them were as plump as rice in autumn. Lu Fang raised his head. "Why didn't you go find Jusha first?" Zhu Fei laughed angrily. "My son is dead, I can just have another one. But if you, Lu Fang, die in Lotus Flower Blessed Land, am I supposed to waste another 60 years? Zhu Fei stood up, waved his hand, and called a beautiful woman to his side. "Go and have a drink with senior brother Lu, whom you respected and admired the most in the past. After not seeing each other for so many years, you must have a lot to talk about." The woman's face paled. Zhu Fei patted her cheeks. "Be good, be obedient." The ground shook and Zhu Fei's figure disappeared. Those women were like birds flapping their wings, flying through the air. Their clothes fluttered and ribbons hung in the air. This charming and gentle scene caused the passers-by on the nearby streets to be mesmerized. Lu Fang stood up and said to the woman with the unfamiliar yet familiar face, "Shall we sit down and talk?" The woman trembled with fear and nodded. The two sat facing each other. The tavern's proprietress hid behind the counter and squatted down. Lu Fang went to get 2 jugs of wine. Without waiting for Lu Fang to pour the wine, the woman who had been in the Spring-Tide Palace for so many years and was already used to serving others hurriedly stood up and poured wine for Lu Fang. Only then did she pour a bowl for herself. Lu Fang did not look at that face that had once caused one's heart to break. He only glanced at that pair of slender hands that had been maintained like a young girl's. He lifted the wine bowl and smiled. The woman let out a slight sigh of relief. She thought for a moment, then got up and went to the street outside the tavern. She helped Lu Fang retrieve the small Kai and the great Chun sword. She even picked up the head of the smiling man and placed it on another table in the tavern. After she sat down, she smiled sweetly. Lu Fang held the wine bowl in one hand and turned his head to look at the empty street. It was as if he saw a young man and a young woman who were a match made in heaven chasing after each other. Zhong Qiu only had eyes for the white-robed young man. He said, "When you and I fight, no one will interfere. Therefore, you only need to focus on punching." Zhong Qiu added, "If anyone still secretly attacks you, I will definitely kill them, whether it is Ding Ying or Yu Zheni." Chen Pinggan raised the back of his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. A wound appeared on his arm and the white bone was visible. In order to block Lu Fang's sword, the sleeve of his snow-white robe was torn open. This was the first time the golden necklace robe had been damaged. Although the magic treasure's effect had been sealed, its toughness was still there. It was enough to show the superior lethality of Lu Fang's swordsmanship. After Zhong Qiu finished speaking, he began to walk forward. His steps seemed slow, but in fact, he floated 20 to 30 feet with each step. There was no fluctuation of qi activity. Zhong Qiu was the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan kingdom. He was also a famous scholar who excelled in calligraphy and painting. Every word and every sentence was in accordance with the rules. Every punch and kick was in accordance with the laws. Those who reached the peak were called literary saints and martial grandmasters. Zhong Qiu was both. Ding Ying looked down on the martial artists of the world, but he had his eyes on Zhong Qiu. Of course, there was a reason for this. Chen Pinggan stood in his original position and did not move an inch. Zhong Qiu's leisurely stroll reminded him of the scene when Ding Ying entered the main hall of the White River Temple. The old man from Luopo Mountain's bamboo house, that kind of invincible posture, Chen Pinggan could only roughly understand. It was just that the disparity in cultivation was too great, and the distance between them was too great. Chen Pinggan could not figure out the purpose behind it. The old man surnamed Kui's martial arts were too high. Although he did not spoil Chen Pinggan's growth by pulling up seedlings, Chen Pinggan's progress after reaching the Four Realms did not benefit him much. However, Chen Pinggan could not feel the uniqueness of Ding Ying and Zhong Qiu's oneness of heaven and man the first time. The second time, it was chewy and he could taste some of its flavor. Zhong Qiu simply faced him head-on. He did not have the aggressive aura of the pink Vaja Ma Xian, the treacherous and sinister smile of the smiling face, nor the indomitable advance and sharpness of Feng Qingbai's assassination sword. Zhong Qiu's shoulders shook imperceptibly. He was dressed in a green robe, and the profundity of his shoulders was like the clouds passing by the side of an ancient pine tree. Zhong Qiu's fist arrived in front of Chen Pinggan. There was not the slightest bit of fist aura leaking outwards, nor was there any huge sound of wind or thunder. Because Zhong Qiu's fist was too strange, Chen Pinggan was momentarily distracted for the first time. He hesitated whether he should meet the enemy with the deity-beating drum style and fight for a decisive blow, or use the deity-suppressing head from the sword art proper to defend himself with a punch. Fortunately, Chen Pinggan immediately gave up on these two options. He retreated and slid backwards. At the same time, he instinctively raised his arm and covered his face with his palm. Zhong Qiu's fist hit Chen Pinggan's palm. He did not overdo it. However, Chen Pinggan was fiercely slapped in the face with the back of his hand. He flew backwards with a bang. He twisted his body, his two snow-white sleeves flipping in the air, and stood still 30 feet away. Zhong Qiu still had one hand behind his back. He said indifferently, "You can't be distracted." Chen Pinggan's left hand clenched and loosened. The numbness in his palm, as if struck by lightning, was finally gone. Zhong Qiu said with a smile, "You're too smart. If I didn't test you, I wouldn't be sure whether you're left-handed or not. When you punched Lu Fangju 10 times, you were probably sure that Lu Fangju would die without a doubt, so you deliberately exchanged your left and right fists, 6 on the left and 4 on the right. Presumably, you started preparing for the next big battle at that time, right?" Chen Pinggan didn't say anything. Zhong Qiu didn't take it seriously. "The reason why I'm stubbornly talking to you about this is that my punch was very unkind when I tried to save Lu Fangju. Therefore, when you were distracted just now, I was merciful and didn't kill you. Next, I won't be polite with you. Zhong Qiu turned to Feng Qingbai and the others and said, don't touch the little girl on the bench. Otherwise, don't blame me for killing the innocent. Chen Pinggan appeared behind Zhong Qiu in a flash. He swung his arm and then suddenly shook his forearm. His fist shot out like an arrow and hit the back of Zhong Qiu's head. Zhong Qiu straightened his back. His back bulged like a mountain and his ribs moved like dragons. He didn't move a single step and took Chen Pinggan's powerful and ferocious punch head-on. Because Chen Pinggan didn't use the deity drumming style, his punch was too big and powerful. Against a great guru like Zhong Qiu, this punch would probably miss. A pure martial artist, when his kung fu was profound, could avoid danger by not seeing or hearing it. He could even kill the person near his bed in his sleep and then continue to sleep soundly. Chen Pinggan only threw an ordinary punch. Moreover, Zhong Qiu unexpectedly stood as still as a mountain. In this way, it was difficult to stop after one punch. Zhong Qiu threw a backhand punch at Chen Pinggan's ribs and sent Chen Pinggan flying. However, Zhong Qiu's second punch was kicked by Chen Pinggan. Zhong Qiu didn't have a good chance to beat him when he was down. The two separated again and stood still. Zhong Qiu twitched the corner of his mouth. It turned out that the imperial tutor of the Nanyuan kingdom deliberately did this to make up for his sneak attack. Of course, it was also a bait. The two collided almost at the same time. Often, their fists would either miss each other or exchange a punch as if a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. This fight was actually silent. It was completely different from the earth-shattering fight between Chen Pinggan and Lu Fang. Zhu Shi couldn't understand it at all. Feng Qingbai, the banished immortal, was a little better because he had met some great gurus of the Tongye continent. It was a punch that could truly be described as majestic. When this punch landed on a person's body, it would be like a boulder being thrown into a lake. The ripples would cause external injuries and internal injuries. Zhong Qiu once used only one punch to beat a Honglian great guru until he was bedridden for several years. Under his clothes, his skin shattered like porcelain, not to mention his internal organs. After hearing the teacher's words, the skinny little girl on the small stool smiled as if she had been pardoned. At this moment, she showed her teeth and brandished her claws, imitating Chen Pinggan and Zhong Qiu's punches. Finally, the first small victory was decided. Chen Pinggan's fist was pushed away by a tricky elbow and his chest was pushed by Zhong Qiu's palm. His body leaped over the gully and crashed into the opposite wall. Zhong Qiu stepped over the gully created by Lu Fang's sword. However, Chen Pinggan did not collapse like the Peeper woman and Lu Fang. He shook his shoulders and his clothes, and the wall rocks that had been smashed by his back fell to the ground. Just as Chen Pinggan was about to make a move, Zhong Qiu's punches suddenly became much faster. One punch followed another, and in an instant, there were 10 punches. 6 punches on the left and 4 on the right. It was the deity drumming boxing stance that Zhong Qiu had imitated. Even the sequence of his punches was exactly the same. What was even stranger was that after Zhong Qiu's 10 punches, the high wall still hadn't been completely broken. Chen Pinggan was still trapped in the wall. Chen Pinggan didn't resign himself to death. He was too familiar with the deity drumming boxing stance, and after fighting with Zhong Qiu, he had a rough understanding of the stance. 4 of Zhong Qiu's 10 punches were blocked by him. However, after 6 punches landed solidly on his body, blood seeped out from the corner of Chen Pinggan's mouth. The last punch, especially, had already made Chen Pinggan's body bounce. Even though it was the first time Zhong Qiu had imitated someone else's boxing stance, his punches were still calm and methodical. Just as he was about to make another 10 punches, he immediately took a few steps back. He took another step back and swept across the gully. It turned out that the moment Chen Pinggan seemed to be exhausted, his body in the wall slightly bounced back. It was at that moment that Zhong Qiu's hair stood on end. His thoughts tightened, and without thinking, Zhong Qiu voluntarily gave up the great advantage and chose to stop and retreat. Zhong Qiu was unusually vigilant. He had underestimated this young man's ability to withstand pain and almost fell for it. Chen Pinggan felt a little regretful. He was only a hair's breadth away from successfully executing the deity drumming boxing stance. Therefore, Zhong Qiu's seemingly fake 10 punches could be considered a waste. After Chen Pinggan floated to the ground, he slowly walked toward the gully. Zhong Qiu laughed involuntarily. I'm learning your boxing stance, and you're learning my steps. However, Zhong Qiu narrowed his eyes. The big boxing stance that he had comprehended had nothing to do with boxing moves. It was to train his back like a mountain, his shoulders like moving clouds and flowing water, his elbows like an eagle's beak, and finally his hands and fists. Once such a stance was set up and constantly trained, it would be like a mountain rooted in the earth. No matter how fierce or exquisite the opponent's punch or sword was, it would always be an enemy to Zhong Qiu's entire spirit and qi. Zhong Qiu had privately named such a proud boxing stance as the Peak. Even if it was given to a grandmaster of external boxing like the 8-armed deity Shui Yuan, who watched with wide eyes and secretly learned from it over and over again, he might not be able to truly understand its inner essence. It was not difficult to look like it, but without a few years of dedicated study, one could forget about it. However, the young man in front of him had already somewhat grasped the spirit of his own boxing stance. Separated by a ravine, the two confronted each other again. Chen Pinggan took a deep breath. It was rare for him to take the initiative to speak during a fight. Does your boxing stance have a name? Zhong Qiu nodded and said with a smile, it's called the Peak. When I comprehended it in my early years, I was at the age of youthful vigor. I felt that if I continued to practice it, I could definitely stand at the top of the world. Later on, I was too lazy to change it. Among the 10 direct disciples, most of them have practiced it for 20 or 30 years, but they can't reach a higher level with just a few glances from you. You're indeed a banished immortal. Chen Pinggan suddenly smiled and said, the fist manual that I first practiced is called Mountain Shaking Fist. Zhong Qiu smiled and said, is my fist higher than the mountains, or is your fist able to shake the mountains? Let's see. Zhong Qiu took a step back and squatted slightly. He raised one hand high and slightly tilted his wrist. His palm was like holding something, and his other hand was clenched in front of him. Even if he stood still, at this moment, Zhong Qiu still made all the spectators on the street feel suffocated, as if a storm was coming. This was the first time that the world's #1 fighter had put on a real boxing stance. Chen Pinggan's heart was as still as water. This trip to the capital city of the Nanyuan Kingdom to look for the Taoist temple and wander around for so long that it made Chen Pinggan so upset that he even put down his boxing and swordsmanship. During this time, he had seen many people and things. However, there were some things that he didn't pay attention to at that time, but after fighting with his enemy Zhong Qiu, he was inspired and had accumulated a lot. When he first lived in that house, Chen Pinggan had nothing to do, because he often had to pass by the neighboring martial arts club. He sat quietly in the shadows where no one noticed and secretly watched those old martial artists in the eyes of the common people practice boxing. The boxing master was an old man who was worshipped by the disciples like a god. In addition to teaching him stance, steps, and boxing stances, he would also talk about his heroic deeds in Jianghu. However, in Chen Pinggan's eyes, the old man's boxing skills were really mediocre. At that time, Chen Pinggan left quietly very soon. Later, when he looked for the Taoist temple, he didn't have any clues, so he went to the martial arts club to relax. At that time, the master of the martial arts club was watching the disciples while holding his hands behind his back. He talked about very vague martial arts principles, such as 1 branch moves 100 branches shake. Our internal martial arts does not listen to sound or shape, but listen to the strength. Only when you reach this step can you be considered to be at home. Muscles and bones need to be loose, skin and hair need to be attacked. Once, someone attacked me from behind. Purely out of instinct, I turned around and punched, beating him half to death. Chen Pinggan found it funny. Finally, the master did something that Chen Pinggan had never seen before. For the first time, he had a whole new level of respect for the old man. The old man asked a young disciple who had just become an inner disciple to stand still. Then, he asked 2 people to hold his hands tightly, pulling his arms taut and straight. 2 more people squatted on the ground, holding the disciples' knees tightly. After that, the old man began to straighten the disciple's spine. He didn't just pinch the muscles, he straightened it from the disciple's neck to the cervical vertebrae. In Jianghu, this was called Great Dragon Training. Finally, when the old man reached the end of the disciple's spine, he suddenly pressed down gently. The disciple was shocked and shivered. All the hair on his body stood up, like a dense forest. The young disciple's struggle made the two senior brothers who were holding his arms sway. They were pulled a step away, but the two who were holding his legs only moved slightly. The old man was a little disappointed, but he didn't say anything. If the four people who were holding his limbs couldn't stabilize their bodies, then they would be considered to be good martial arts talents. The inner disciple who was Great Dragon Training had a good aptitude, but he certainly didn't have a big future. Chen Pinggan had watched it with great interest, but didn't think much about it afterward. It was only at this moment that Chen Pinggan suddenly realized that he had been surrounded by people for no apparent reason, and that he had been trapped in a tight encirclement, and that he was in a situation of certain death. Before he fought with Lu Fang, he could retract and release his punches freely. But his state of mind didn't catch up. But after fighting with Zhong Qiu, his state of mind was also improved. Especially after learning Zhong Qiu's big fist stance and remembering the Great Dragon Training, Chen Pinggan's heart was moved. He couldn't help but use the initial 6-step stance of the mountain-shaking fist to move forward. He didn't care about retracting or releasing his fist intent. Unconsciously, he was in the air with each step. But after practicing for 1,000,000 times, Chen Pinggan's spine was like a Great Dragon Training on its own after taking the 5th step, making a series of soybean cracking sounds. Zhong Qiu's body suddenly moved forward, and he threw a punch. He wanted to punch the young man whose momentum had skyrocketed back from the ravine. Chen Pinggan, who moved like the wind, also threw a punch. They were an arm's length apart, and their fists hit each other's chests at almost the same time. Zhong Qiu's green robe fluttered in the wind, and he instantly disappeared from the street with a rumbling sound. If someone were to look down at the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom from the air, they would find that a long straight line had been torn open. Zhong Qiu, who had been pushed back 200 feet by the punch, had his legs sunk deep into the ground after he stopped his momentum with great difficulty. Although he only suffered minor injuries, Zhong Qiu had lost. The white-robed man stood beside the ravine on the street, not retreating a single step. In terms of this world, Zhong Qiu was no longer the best in the world. He was Chen Wudi, who was one arm's length away. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.